Assalamualaikum listeners, welcome back to another episode of Boys in the Cave. I'm your host Tanzim and I'm joined by my regular co-host Rafael. Alhamdulillah, we have someone very special in the cave today, Dr. Shadee Elmasry, born and raised in New Jersey, studied in Muslim world in Fez, Cairo, Makka, Madina. He's completed a master's from Georgetown, Washington University in comparative religion and a PhD from University of London. SOAS. How do you say it on Twitter? Do we say it as SOAS?
They call it SOAS.
Yeah, SOAS. Yeah, that's what I thought because it sounds more fancy that way. Alhamdulillah.
Yeah.
And he did works on Dawah in the works of Imam al-Haddad. So, Assalamualaikum Sheikh, and welcome back to Boys in the Cave.
Walaikum salam rahmatullah. I think I came on very early when you guys had just started, right?
Yeah, I think it was episode 20-ish. Before then, I think
it was one of the earliest episodes. You were the first, one of the
good. So how you guys been since then?
Alhamdulillah, we've grown quite a lot. I think a lot of controversy along the way as well.
Outwards quite a lot as well.
Well, what kind of controversy?
Let's not get into it. Let's not remind the audience.
Yeah,
Maybe I'll say it offline. I'll say it offline, inshallah. I don't want to give exposure to it. Because I remember I messaged you, Sheikh. I messaged you on Messenger about this. Like, what do you think of this figure and this and that? But I don't think you replied. But it's all right. I'll probably get your thoughts offline, inshallah.
Had you replied, you may have saved us a world
of
pain.
Okay. So maybe I didn't see that message because I never intentionally ignore anyone.
Yeah, no, of course.
Okay, no, I was probably spamming you. That's why.
Yeah,
I think maybe you
mute.
So who am I talking to right now?
So I'm Tanzim. I actually was on the episode with you when we first did the early episode. Rafael is my new co-host along the way. We needed a white revert, person on the cave. So he's that, and he's Maliki as well. So he's got that vibe. So we recruited him.
That's good. That's good. He was talking.
So you guys can enter.
Yeah, that's good. So and aren't you guys a third guy?
No. Yeah, there is a third guy, but he's married and has a child, so he's not always free at 8:15, 8:30 when usually people go to work at this time. So
I got you.
He's definitely on his way to work now. But I've actually met you before, Dr. Shadee. You came to Lakemba Mosque, which is literally right around the corner from where I live.
Yeah. Oh, great. Close. That was I came twice.
Yeah, and I actually asked you a question, and for everyone listening, I mean. I know that people get a sort of grasp of your personality and so forth from listening to on Safina Society, and besides,
Twitter.
Besides being one of the more quotable, for English speaking Muslims growing up now who are in universities, you're probably one of the most quotable, intellectuals in the space at the moment. So. That's something that, I don't think I have had a conversation that extended any kind of considerable period of time about Islam in which I didn't mention something that I'd learnt from yourself.
Well, that's an
yeah, and it's absolutely you're a massive inspiration for us, and I will say that
at that time.
I will say when I remember when we all approached you, because that during that event, there were a couple of other speakers. They left they had to leave, but you actually stayed back and answered the question. So I was going to say, for everyone listening, you get an impression of someone's personality and their kind of sense of humor and more kind of serious, more intimate aspects of an individual when they are on a podcast. But when you judge someone in their day-to-day lives, you can have a public image, but then also the ability to interact with Muslims and the community at large in a kind of casual but also very friendly and also very informative way is something really unique, and I think something that I really, really appreciated about you. And ever since I met you that day at LMA, I have had just immense respect because you stayed back and you were just taking in all these questions left, right, and center and breaking them down for us. And
I love meeting people, and I love and I remember being a young Muslim myself, and I love talking to young Muslims and just being around. And believe it or not, I've never ever had a conflict with anyone in person, and I've had people come in with bizarre views. Right, we got along just fine in person. It's just something about the internet. And Twitter in specific, that it's just conflict oriented, right? It's something, I don't know what it is exactly about the platform that it's conflict oriented, but I've never ever had a single conflict with a young Muslim who came in, regardless whatever their views was. We always left with amicable relationship. And I love meeting young Muslims. And I know, I haven't seen you on Twitter. Maybe I don't know your handle. But I've seen
Rafael doesn't use Twitter.
Yeah.
I'm the only one on Twitter. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've seen you look like your profile pic like someone who's winning an Academy Award or something. I mean, your profile, his profile is great. So Rafael, could you tell me about Tanzim? Is he an actor or something? I mean, he looks great in those pictures.
He is very much, he's very much a very mashallah, very photogenic.
What was that award you're winning?
Oh yeah,
I think it's more like I want to try to, because I know none of my co-hosts are properly on Twitter, so I think I try to like at least engage in Twitter because I know that's where most of the sort of discussion happens. Yeah. So I guess I try to portray myself in that manner. So maybe it's that vibe as well. And I just happened to take that photo as I was interesting. So that photo was because alhamdulillah, we were finalists for Australian Muslim Achievement Awards for the Boys in the Cave podcast. So I took that photo before as I was heading to the event. So that's
what I was thinking. I'm thinking like, did these young guns win some kind of podcast award? And they're like 4 years younger than us. We've been around like a lot longer, and they've already won some kind of big award. And I'm clicking on the picture, and I'm like, he's winning some kind of award. That's for sure. Right?
Australia is a very, very small place. We'll just say that.
Like, it's not much of an achievement, to be honest, because if you're the only podcast in Australia as Muslims,
there are more people in Chicago than there are in Australia.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy. That's crazy.
Oh, pretty much. It's pretty small. But alhamdulillah, we've been managed to attract the attention and also the eyes of many of the Muslims in Australia as well, unfortunately. But we'll just quickly
and worldwide as well. We got like the most viewership in America. So I think that's partly because of Twitter as well.
Yeah, that's
because like people have discussions there. Alhamdulillah. So
we also had like Mortaza from Mad Mamluks on, and like we had like quite a few American guests of note.
The thing is with Australia, my philosophy there that it's a really beautiful country to live in as long as you don't think about how far away you are from the rest of the world, right? Yeah. Once that thought seeps into your head, it could really make you, like messed up in the head by thinking how far you are and that nobody's coming, right? Like no one's passing by. You live in New Jersey, everyone passes by. New York, New Jersey, Chicago, everyone's passing through, right? But Australia, no one's passing through. And to bring someone, you have to put a reverse mortgage on your house to pay the tickets, to bring someone over.
Absolutely. I mean, I found out the hard way. Last time I went on a plane, I was a kid. And so I decided, it would be a great idea after my nikah and my, my marriage, etc., to go on a honeymoon. Yeah. And also to like kill two birds with one stone, go and explore the Maghreb and see if there were study options there as well. After 27 hours on the plane, I'm now seriously reevaluating where I would like to go to study, because you get a real grasp of just how hard it would be to live that far away from everything. And I mean, I know that like America is also far, but I still feel like it's. I think it's like, how long does it take you to fly from like
it's a day,
the East Coast basically to the Maghreb?
Yeah, it's a full day. Yeah. So when I came over, it was a full day. You miss a day going, you gain a day coming back, but you're traveling for 24 hours. You're and depending on how you sleep in those 24 hours on the plane, you can lose another 2 days of bizarre sleeping patterns when you arrive back home. But it's 24 hours. We go westbound to LA or Vancouver.
And then over.
Usually there's a layover, right, for 6 hours or something. So that's another quarter of a day just sitting there. And then you come over, if you take the 12-hour flight to Sydney or wherever you're going. So
that's a really long way.
When are you coming back, Dr. Shadee? When are you coming back to Sydney? Because you haven't been here for a while. I haven't
been here for a while. The next trip is Singapore and Malaysia, right?
But you're not coming here.
Not coming here, but you guys, how far are you from Singapore and Malaysia?
Not that far, to be honest. But even Singapore and Malaysia is far from Australia. Like,
really,
it's still 7 hours. Australia is big.
You're all down under for us. I mean, Singapore, Malaysia, Australia. It's like one.
It's close,
category for us.
I guess it's relative. I mean, Australia is the same size as the United States minus Alaska. So if you think about like where Sydney is at the bottom, you kind of have to fly all the way over the other side. So it's literally like flying from Florida to Oregon and then again get to like and then to get to like Malaysia and so it's like at least 7-8 hours on the plane anyway to get outside of Australia itself. So that's crazy. It's you do get the sense of isolation. It's like living on a permanent like kind of hike. You know, you ever go hiking in the bush, and like it's living in Australia is kind of living like where you stop at the campsite, because if you think of it in terms of geopolitics, and you think of it in terms of like being this isolated island on the corner of the world, that was only really like known to Europeans and the rest of the world like properly in the last 300 years, which is crazy. Because like when you read history and you're like looking at the history books, like what happened in Europe, like you know, the fall of Granada in 1492, and you're like, no one knew Australia was like around back then.
That's crazy.
And yet,
That is crazy.
it just gives some perspective there. But welcome to Boys in the Cave, and it's a pleasure to have you on, and coordinating and traversing the considerable distances in time to come and have a chat with us.
I think I wanted to ask Sheikh to kind of kick it off. I think there's a lot of discussion. Like I sent you some questions and stuff, so it's going to be good, inshallah. I think you may have sort of an idea what we're going to discuss, but because you're on Twitter, you're teaching institutions and all that. So I guess you'd say that you'd have a good grasp of the community, because a lot of teachers, for example, a lot of sheikhs, they may only be stuck in a bubble in the sense that they're only teaching in the masajid and stuff. Like that's what I feel with my local sheikhs. Like they're not really active in the public sphere, because I don't know, life, and they're not really well versed with technology anyway. So they just kind of keep them. So they're not. So every time they view like some sort of fitna in the world, they see astaghfirullah, and that's they shy away from it. Obviously, we should do that as Muslims, but I guess when you're like for me, like I've grown up in the West. You live in the West. You go through, like, you actually have to address those issues head on. So at the same time, you get into Deen and you become Muslim. So you're just like, okay, I have Islam and Deen and all that, but then I'm stuck in this kind of environment where it's like fahisha everywhere and all that. At the same time, I wanted to ask you, so in general, what do you feel as Muslims in the West, what should our role be essentially? Because there's this whole sort of divide, and I think I can name labels like perhaps from the Salafi camp will get a more idea of, look, you got to do hijrah eventually back to your homelands and this, that. Here, there's some sort of groups that may be, HT, for example, might be like, we work back in the homelands because khilafah, this and that. There may be others that will be like, okay, I think Sheikh Abdul Hakim Murad and stuff are more in the line of forging an independent Muslim identity path in the West. So you make this your homeland, and then you kind of engage in politics and etc. And work to have institutions in place as Muslims, so that we can essentially live here and kind of fight Islamophobia, to working in businesses, and to make sure that it's safe. It's like a safe haven for Muslims, like they can pray during breaks and not have no issues in that front. And all that. So it's about establishing your own independent Muslim identity in the West. So where would you say, with all your engagement and all your sort of, your experiences, where do you feel that as Muslims in the West, what we should do?
So, well, everything you said is basically what I believe in. I'm a pragmatist, and there's no value in talking about something that's never going to happen. So the idea of 100 million Western Muslims making the hijrah is something that's a pointless discussion. So, I mean, if it's a personal choice, that's one thing. But the idea that you can use this as a way to solve problems, and you're going to get all these millions of Muslims to buy into your idea of the hijrah, even if it has fiqhi backing, and it might. Now, the Hanafi school might have a different opinion on that. So once you have one opinion in the madhabs, that basically kills the idea of obligating it upon everyone else. So the idea of hijrah to me is it's an issue that's something that I have no problem with. I might want to do it myself someday, right? But is that going to be our policy going forward? The answer is no. So being that as it is, there's no point in further discussing it or treating it like a possibility. And one of the things that you have to do when you make a commitment, you have to remove all other safety nets. For example, you can't simply say, well, I could make the hijrah, so let me just give it a half effort here. You have to sort of you have to pretend that this is life and death, right? You have to make it life and death. And if you know the famous story of Tariq ibn Ziyad when he burned the ships, right? He burned the ships symbolically, saying that, if we're going to leave, so to give a background for people who don't know, Tariq ibn Ziyad was the Arab tabi'i who went up with the Sahaba, with the tabi'in and the tabi'in, and he went up to Andalusia to basically do the fatah there, to conquer it and bring it into the fold of Islam, or Dar al-Islam. And he burnt the ships when they arrived, basically telling his soldiers, this is it, we're not going back. If you want to go back, you're going to have to go and buy a ship, right? Or make a ship and do that. And mind you, it was almost more symbolic than anything else, in the sense that it'll take you how long does it take to go buy a ship? And the distance between Andalusia and Al Maghrib is maybe 45 minutes by ship or something?
Yeah, you can see it.
So, yeah, you can see it. So in a sense, it's symbolic. But we have to have that attitude. If you're going to achieve anything, you have to have that attitude. Even though deep in the back of your mind, you do have the possibility that you're welcome as a Muslim in different countries. You can practice your Islam in Turkey, in Malaysia, etc. But you can't live like that. You can't live with this idea that I'd really have to try so hard because I have a backup plan. You're never going to achieve anything if you have that idea. So when you move forward, you're going to move forward keeping in mind another strategy, which is that you have to prioritize, right? You can't lose yourself. You have to triage. You can't lose your foundation in order to build the first floor. You can't lose the first floor in order to build the second floor of a house. You can't lose your electricity for a couch. And we have to think very clearly about everything that we do, because different concessions that we make, different things that we tolerate, we have to think very deeply that will they undermine one of our foundations? So there's a coaching philosophy in hockey, which I always believed in, is that good defensive positioning creates offensive opportunities. In business, let's say people don't know sports. In business, we say that liability control creates good opportunities. In other words, when you don't have a lot of vulnerabilities, and when you don't have a lot of money that is going to be lost, when you don't have a lot of expenses to be paid, the world opens up to you. All these opportunities open up. I view our situation here no differently. When our spiritual state and our state of our identity and ourselves and who we are and our mental situation is in a safe and a strong, founded, protected position, then all of a sudden all the opportunities are going to open up. I was just teaching the high schoolers the other day, because I teach in the masjid 4 days a week. And I was teaching the high schoolers and talking to them about this, that, wait a second, it wasn't the high schoolers, I think it was adults actually. I was teaching that if you look at most reform movements in any religion, in any philosophy, it originates with a people who do not have a strong mental, emotional, personal identity establishment in themselves, in their own heart, confidence, a sense of who you are, sense of your origin, sense of where you're going. Okay, there is a lack, there is an absence. Okay, in people who create these types of reform movements, and what there is in its place of that is a sense of awe and mystification of the other. Okay, to the point that you feel inferior about your own self, you feel unsure about your own self, and you're amazed by someone else. You therefore try to cast what you're stuck with, like the religion that you have or whatever it is that you have, in the image of the one that you admire. Okay? And so reform movements crop up in the West, and they, in my opinion, undermine everything else, because the foundation is who you are and what you believe. You can't sell that. You can't trade that away, right? Just to achieve a temporary goal. Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. So oftentimes when we talk about politics, when we talk about entertainment, when we talk about business, okay, when we talk about other things, we're trying to make something work, which I totally agree with. You gotta be jiving with the world around you. It's unhealthy to be ghettoized. It's unhealthy to put your head like a like an ostrich in the sand when there are like lions and hyenas around you. Okay, you have to live with it, but you have to live with it in the right way. Let me give you a very simple example. If any of you run a business, the lifeline of businesses is cash. That's the oxygen of a business. People grow their businesses by loans from the banks, right? Now, many Muslims, and I was coming upon even a sheikh who was even wanting to write a fatwa about this, right? That if we don't take loans, we're going to be ghettoized. We will be behind. There's no doubt. We won't grow, okay? And we need to take these loans so that we can advance ourselves, right? And then digging into the Hanafi school of thought for fatwa on riba in Darul Harb. And Darul Harb, then digging into broad definitions of Darul Harb, which is any land in which the Muslim is not in control of the legislation or in the majority. So I thought about this for some while and I was like, send me the fatwa. I'm sitting there. Then I thought to myself, number one, there are always side effects to these things. The first side effect is that if I'm a business leader and I could take loans from the banks in the hundreds of millions of dollars, then I would not actually want to live in the Muslim world. And I would not want my current country to be moved outside of the category of Darul Harb. I wouldn't ever want it to be more than 50% Muslim, because that means loss of my profits and revenues and chance of doing business. That's the first thing. Well, think of the second thing. Whenever you make a fatwa, you have to imagine who else is going to use this fatwa and how it affects your life. If you permit the business leaders who are going to help Islam, et cetera, to take loans with the banks, you know what? Who else is going to take advantage of this? Teenagers and regular people with credit cards. And all of a sudden, you're going to have Muslims with $20,000 of credit card debt. And I was talking with my banker the other day. Not banker like I have loans with him or anything. You're just in the bank. So I go to the local bank and it's early in the morning. And he's sitting there. There's nothing to do. So we're just sitting there talking, right? And he's a Hindu. And I was talking to him like, how do you guys do your loans, et cetera, et cetera? And he's saying, well, how do you guys do it? How do you guys get around doing loans? And we ended up moving to the topic of credit cards. And the guy tells me, man, people are just getting sucked dry by credit cards and they're just really just wasting everything. He's telling me, I got people who have already paid off you pay the interest first, right? He's like, I got people who have $20,000 in the interest of their credit card. In interest, because you pay the interest first, then you pay the actual principal that you owe, right? Or the debt that you owe.
Yeah, that's phenomenal.
He's like
$20,000.
This guy isn't even like have any belief. He's not even a Muslim, right? And he's like, this is mind-boggling. This is how financially ignorant people are, right? Now, I sat there and I said to myself, there's two ways to go about anything. The first way is a give-up attitude. The give-up attitude is like, all right, I can't. And anytime you have to look at your language, when you utter that word, you better have an absolute reason for saying the word you can't, right? And not seeing an option is having no other option is not an answer, is not an absolute that justifies the use of the word you can't. So people should really think about the language that they use. Okay, they should think about either ors. So I said to myself, you know what? I'm not going to use this word, and I'm going to use another word, which is how. Right? How can a business leader achieve the same goal of basically borrowing money, okay, in a way that the borrower or the lender would benefit? Okay, no one's going to give $100,000 qard hasan, or which is just a goodwill loan. Here, take $100,000. Pay me back when you can. No one's going to do this, right? People need something to part with their money. And I'm telling you, it took me about a day to think about this and to call people. And I realized how it can be done. And if it takes me a day to think about it, right, then other people have thought about it too, right? So I may have discovered something in my little group of friends, but this thing already exists in other Muslim countries. And the idea is an equity buyback, right? You basically mortgage out, in a sense, a portion of your business. So the source of money comes in through an investor. Okay, that investor, let's say, gives you $100,000. Let's say he gives you $75,000 or $50,000. Right? It's a contract. In that contract, you come to an agreement at some point in time that there will be he will sell you. You're going to buy him out. You're going to buy out this investor. Right? By that time, the value of your company will have increased, right?
Mm-hmm.
So therefore, he's not going to sell it back at the same price that he bought it, right? And then you're going to pay him back in monthly installments over a period of years. Now, that decision that to sell can be moved up front, or it could be delayed, whatever the terms of the contract, right? So I could say to you, listen, I'm going to buy from you. I'm going to invest $50,000 in your company now, and I'm going to estimate, that your company will double in its value in 5 years. So I'll sell it to you, and you could start buying me out from now. You understand?
Yeah.
It's a murabaha, and I went and I contacted different mashayikh, right? I contacted different scholars about this, and they said, yeah, this is actually exactly how Muslims do it. Muslim businesses do it, right? So the point I'm making here is, and I know I went far off to the comment, but this is a very important subject, right? Of the finances. If we can get our finances to work without bending certain rules that are crystal clear that cannot be bent, then we have to ask the question, how? And we can't have a give up attitude where we end up making a concession that has no precedent and seems to be a crystal clear contradiction of a ijma'i principle, right?
Mm-hmm.
This makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And why do you think it is that financial institutions, because as you said, it's not rocket science, even myself with very little background in economics whatsoever understands the viability of certain sort of Sharia compliant methods of banking that we could set up within our community. So why do you think it hasn't happened yet in the West in particular? Why are there no institutions or organizations that support our own sort of approach to the economic system, considering the prohibition of riba? Why is it that we?
It's a very good question. I think it's a good business for someone who's coming in to start up this business. In the same way that the company started up doing, I don't know if you have it in Australia, but they do the murabaha contracts for homes. I don't know exactly why is it that nobody started this type of. It's very similar. It's instead of buying a home, you're buying equity ownership of a company, right? And you're basically saying right away, so that you don't scare away the business owner, because no business owner wants a partner who's going to drive them crazy, right? You're basically saying, I have nothing to do with this business. Take the money, and we're going to find some way to evaluate it. I don't know why, and then you buy me out. And I don't know why no one started this up. I'm going to keep asking around. I've already gotten my calls and gotten my phone going to do all this stuff, to talk to people. But everyone that I spoke to about this has said that, it makes total sense. Someone said to me, what if the business fails? I said, well, what if a business failed? What would the bank do? The bank says, well, you have a collateral. Well, you could do the same thing with the guy, right?
Yeah.
You could make an agreement that this investor, all right, will at least guarantee him his amount, his principal that he put in, right? Mm-hmm. That I don't think that I've never seen that's problematic in the Sharia, right?
No. And how much would this how much of an impact do you reckon this would make on the perception of Islam in the wider Western community? Because my parents actually asked me, they're like, yo, so are there insurance companies and Islamic banks in Australia that do mortgage free and interest free?
Mike, want to give context because you're revert and stuff.
They really wanted to know, they genuinely wanted to know. This was something they encountered because they were like, oh, how would you feel about taking a small loan in the future? I said, I'm not taking any loan that I have to pay interest on. That's non-negotiable. And they said, okay, we'll have to figure something out. But the thing is, it's interesting because they were really attracted to the idea that Islam prohibited interest. They found that to be quite inspiring
Yeah.
and fascinating.
Yeah.
And I wondered, like, imagine that, you know, I could point out to them and to any other non-Muslim, like, imagine the conversations. They'll be like, yo, did you know that Muslims are out here getting loans and not paying interest?
Yeah.
Like, that they actually have banks where you don't have to pay interest. Like, that would completely shake
It would
up,
transform everything. And the insurance, the method in which Muslims would the Sharia compliant form of insurance, that contract would change the industry if it got, I mean, they might even kill it. They might try to destroy it because it would change everything. It would be less lucrative in a sense for the one who does it.
Yeah.
But if
still, you would be able to make profit, of course.
You're going to make a profit. You're going to make a good profit. And here's the thing. A Muslim does not look at, we're not capitalists in the way of the people around us. We're capitalists who also
capitalism,
have to not go to hell, right? That's our version of capitalism includes not going to hell, because at that point, that's a loss, right? That's an eternal loss. And that's something we believe. So
yeah, of course.
The idea of trying to make a buck for a Muslim is, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And his ethics going into it is going to be that Yawm al-Qiyamah is real, Allah is real, heaven is real, and hell is real. And I'm not going, I'll leave a whole ton of money on the table, because that money that is haram comes with a liability, which is eternal, right? So it doesn't even make sense. So even if that industry, the Sharia compliant insurance industry, is grossing less or netting less than your regular insurance industry, well, it doesn't make a difference, because in our equation, Jahannam is part of the equation. The
Rida greater than
Allah,
profit.
Yeah, is part of the equation. Barakah is part of the equation. And therefore, we're not one-eyed. And when I say one-eyed, meaning looking only at this dunya. We're not secular. We don't only look at this world. The afterlife is part of our equations, right? And that's exactly what, when I discuss any topic with any young Muslim, or even, older folks, except it's harder for the older folks because they're sometimes set in their ways and they don't want to be offended, or told that they're not doing something right. But I always say, I ask, in your equation, is the existence of Allah, heaven and hell, and the Quran and the Sharia, are they given? And have you factored them into the equation? Have you factored in barakah into the equation? Yes or no? Then your equation, I don't want to look at it until you fixed your equation. So I've had many Muslims come up to me about Safina Society, right? And basically saying, look, you got a gold mine here, right? And you could do this, that, and the other, and this could be your earnings. And I said, listen, where is Allah in this equation? You didn't bring it. Where are the mashayikh in the equation, right? I don't want to do something that is so far off that the mashayikh will look at me like, we've never seen any institution like this. Where is the community and the hearts of people in your equation?
Yep.
I won't even look at your equation. If you're solely looking from a marketing or a capitalist or a financial perspective, fine. I love finances. I love dealing with money. I love making money. But where is Allah in the equation? So if it's not there, I'm not even looking at it. No different. I don't know if you heard the episode with Hamza Reza.
Yes.
No different than political engagement, right? You cannot try to suspend the existence of God, prophet, heaven, hell, afterlife, and Sharia, right? And there's a moment there where I brought that up with him, right? Where you cannot contradict your text in the process of trying to do something, right? So that's basically when we're talking about how do we move forward, I'm all about moving forward. Politically, I'm all about moving forward financially, but I'm all about doing it in the right way. I'm not going to lose my foundation. It's stupid. You won't even know who you are.
Absolutely.
People always say, oh, look at the Jews, look at the Jews. Do you know how the Jews have what kind of issues that they have? The Orthodox Jews believe that like 99% of American Jews are completely astray, right? And have completely lost their way. And they're probably right in terms of the Torah, like aligning themselves to the Torah. Is that where we want to go? So, that's the way I look at it.
Some of them don't even believe in, the divine being anymore. It's very strange, Reform Judaism, where there's all these different projects.
Exactly. And it's exactly what the Quran tells us. Muslims look at Jews like there's some kind of amazing example of minority religious success. but you don't know that they have so many divisions amongst them, right? And I once was at a Reform Jewish temple, right? Because I go to all these places, I deal with everyone, right? And there was a program there, so I went up and I'm chit-chatting with the guy, and I said, "Okay, give me the 60-second, because it's been like what, 15 years, 20 years since I've taken my classes on Judaism. Refresh my memory. Give me the 60-second on the difference between Reform, Conservative, and Orthodox." He says, "Well, the first thing is that if I was conservative or Orthodox, I wouldn't even be talking to you." Right? So that's how far apart these schisms are. And Allah says in the Quran, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim, tahsabuhum jami'an wa qulubuhum shatta." You think that they're unified as one force, and they're united, and they're got their money in order, they got the laws in order, they got their PR in order, they got the media in order. You think that it's one unified front, but in reality, their hearts are far apart. Okay, and the opposite is. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add in, like, in terms of, we were talking about financial institutions and all that, like making it halal and all that. Wouldn't you say that it's more harder to go down that route, and obviously that should be our focus, but in terms of attaining it and achieving it, it's like another leap where it's a difficult thing to do. But in the same sense, like living in the capitalist world, things like, I don't know, watching how much electricity you use or energy consumption, all these things are more closer to home, that as Muslims we're not even fulfilling that sort of front on an Islamic sense. So would you say that our focus should also be on, because I guess the Sharia tells us to, do things in a moderate manner, not overeat, all these like things, right? Which I guess as Muslims we don't do because living in the capitalist world. Would you say that Islamically that we can sort of be like, the world is too tough and this and that, so we can kind of let that fly and focus on things that make perhaps a greater impact, like for example what we're proposing now, which is more halal institutions and all that, riba free? Or should our sort of like people would be like, we should work things more closer to home, like, okay, make sure I'm not buying too many clothes from companies that exploit slave labor, or perhaps energy consumption, all these things that are still Islamic that we still don't may not embody fully as a community.
Are you saying like, more concerned with the individual day-to-day things as opposed to going through the jugular with trying to establish institutions? Well, I mean, obviously I think we should do both, but Dr. Shadee.
But the ones that we can do closer to home are easier to do than rather than just taking a more leap that in saying, okay, look, I'm going to try to shake up the industry of riba, for example. You get what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, first of all, whenever you do something, you're going to do it for yourself. You're going to do it in a small scale. You have to walk before you can run. You have to crawl before you can walk. And anything where you're shooting so high up, like we're going to shake up the insurance industry, that's just I turn off personally when I hear that stuff, because it's just never going to happen. It's not never going to happen, but it's not the way to achieve stuff. The way to achieve something is to achieve it in the 1 foot in front of you, right? In the immediate sphere in front of you, right? So give me an example where you can succeed in kindergarten before first grade, in first grade before second grade. Give me examples of minor, small-scale success before talking the big talk of we're shaking up this or that other industry, right? So I have no concern with those big, fancy ideas that the application of which is so far-fetched. Now, you can dream all you want, but in terms of action, you need to act in front of you right now. So show me an example of it in the scale of 10 people. Have you helped one business or 10 businesses, let alone shake up an industry? So that the idea is understood properly. The way to achieve stuff is to take small baby steps, right? Now, when you say what are our concerns, every Muslim is in a different situation. Every Muslim has a different temperament and a different love, right? So overall, I do believe that the financial independence and security should be the number one goal of Muslims in their country, because wherever they are. Because if you think about everything rests upon a paycheck, everything. Okay. Okay. Someone says, "Wait, how? Aqidah is more important than money." Okay. The Aqidah teacher, who's paying him? Right? Who's paying him?
Yeah. How does he eat?
That's a financial
and get
entity.
to classes?
Yeah, it's a financial entity. Are you going to tell me he's going to go be a plumber on the side, or a real estate agent on the side, or an accountant, and then teach in the evening? No, we need a professional here, right? So the degree to which a profession and industry can advance is about the number of hours that they could devote to their craft. Okay, so without worrying about anything else. So if you have an imam and he could do it full time, good. But in his full time, in his 24 hours, if he's going to ponder with his mind about how am I going to send my kids to college, boom, you've taken away time from him, from his craft, right? So when the more you can strengthen the finances of a community, you can do all these things that you want to do. But you got to strengthen the finances first. That's my belief. Right. And this is, I don't know if you guys have this saying, but in America, they say that youth grow up with these liberal ideals and then they become Republicans as they grow older into money. Right. Because the reason is that once you start paying bills and once you start seeing the bills coming down the road, right, that are going to come on my desk and in my mailbox, then and we're not ready for this, right? Then the concern for finances takes over, right? As soon as you have a kid in middle school, you can smell college tuition, right? You can smell it. That's a backbreaker. The college tuition, which mostly colleges, I mean, the efficacy of college is a whole nother subject, but it's just, I guess, a habit we all have to go to college, I guess. But once you have in middle school, you're literally talking half of a decade. In half a decade, I'm going to have a $20,000 bill on my desk. Like who's handling that? You want to talk about lowering the electricity? You want to talk about wearing, like a cannabis shirt or wearing ropes that are organic instead of wearing clothes made in Korea? That's a luxury idea of someone who hasn't yet been faced with the reality of bills, right? So when we talk about priorities, everyone's going to have their own priority, but objectively, we can state that there are certain times where certain priorities supersede others. And my personal opinion is that finances is one of the most important ones. And most of the time, we're barking up the wrong trees. We're working at the wrong priorities. We want to have political engagement when we don't even have a dollar to pay to these politicians, right?
To some extent, I agree with you in terms of the importance of financial institutions, especially given how widespread the riba is. And I brought up this point actually in regards to a discussion about the promotion of LGBT agendas in the community recently, and the point I made was, like we all understand the position that on zina, and we all we should all understand what the Sharia says about zina, and that this act is prohibited in the Sharia, obviously, and it's something that we shouldn't be promoting. However, what is far less talked about is the promotion of riba. And that's something that's very widespread in the community. And we even have, ulama who are peddling the idea that to take a loan from a Western institution is permissible. And I think that's something that's really disconcerting. I mean, if you think about it in terms of the Day of Judgment and if you think about it in terms of Aqidah genuinely being at the forefront of everything that you do, and it's really not. I think that part of coming into the West is really assimilating into the idea of the secular, where your Aqidah is stretched away from your day-to-day interaction with society, because that's essentially what secularism and the idea of secularism is, which is to separate your participation in civic society, in governance, in politics, and in these institutions from your personal spiritual convictions. Mm-hmm. But that's what happens to Muslims, and thus what happens is we tend to say, oh, well, we can take loans and we can do whatever we can to get ahead in society, materially or politically, and separate and deal with our faith as a sort of compartmentalized and separate aspect. Whereas in terms of the Islamic worldview, that's an abomination. And actually, I'd say it's not dissimilar from Reform Judaism, as we mentioned before. Though I understand that it's complex, and I don't personally blame individuals who take loans. There's a lot of complexity. It's more a kind of communal obligation to establish these institutions, and I'm 100% in agreement on that has to really, really be a priority.
The one loan that I have no solution for is the student loan.
Yeah, that's what we have in Australia.
Yeah, that's the one loan that I don't know. There's no solution. Students always ask me, what do I do about my student loan? And I tell them, honestly, I don't have an answer to you. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer. And Sheikh Hatim al-Hajj, who I respect a lot, he's a Hanbali scholar. Many people think that he is as hardcore, Salafi, that's impossible. It's totally untrue. He is completely someone who is a Hanbali, who recognizes the Asha'ira and the Maturidis and all the other schools of thought and Tasawwuf and respects the awliya. So that's the Hatim al-Hajj that I know. And he runs a fatwa council called AMJA. And in this, and with AMJA, he basically released a fatwa saying that there is a communal necessity, and due to communal necessity, that he's
Fard kifaya,
essentially something similar to like that, or more like darura, a haja, or a haja, a widespread haja, and he permitted therefore student loans based upon that doctrine or that idea of a community-wide dire need. So that's the one thing. Secondly, you're 100% right that why we really criticize people who go soft on or promote zina, but we don't have the same idea of someone who is capitulating to riba. And to give people a definition, very simple definition of riba is a loan that leads to a benefit. Simple as that. And when I say lead, when they say lead, they mean in the contract. Yep. Okay, in the contract. So if you give me a $10,000 loan, and in the back of your mind, well, Shadee is such a nice guy. When he pays me back $10,000, he's going to take me out to eat as well, right? Or he's going to maybe, later down the line, he'll give my son a job or something like that. That is not what we're talking about. We're talking about inside in the contract itself, that there is a benefit, whether it be an administrative fee, a late fee, anything else that is an additional amount beyond the original money that's lent out. So just to give people a definition on that's what it means. You're 100% right, though. And anytime that you find yourself imitating, you're in trouble. Anytime you find yourself capitulating, you're in trouble, right? Anytime you try to find yourself explaining away something or taking a long roundabout way to explain yourself, you're in trouble, right? So we shouldn't, we should look out for these tells. These are like tells that we are, going down a wrong path.
Would you say though, Sheikh, like we're kind of what we're doing, we're sort of propagating sort of a bit halalified version of capitalism for Muslims in order, like, for me, it's like, even when we take from the seerah, it's not like, I don't know, like maybe you can expound on it, but was it necessary the fact that Rasulullah was aiming for money only in the sense of how to go? Because what we're going about is, I understand your point about paychecks and stuff, but at the same time, like, isn't it a bit harder to find examples of that specifically about attaining more money per se? Because, like, for example, my sort of perspective would be, even like, I think perhaps you can also expand on this, is like in the Sufism way, for example, even the way we eat, halal meat, we don't even know it's fully halal in the sense of how it's done or processed to the clothes we buy and everything. And it stems from capitalism, where people that are in third world countries are being exploited, etc., which may not be deemed as Islamic anyway. So for us, as on the basis of capitalism, we know that it sort of breathes through the idea of us having always wanting more. So wouldn't you say by, like, for example, by making ethical brands and all that, the money will come through that way if Muslims as a community worldwide can kind of hop onto those kind of business and brands that can kind of ensure that there are ethical standards that are practiced, which may be a bit more tangible rather than perhaps which sort of, I guess, feeds into the idea of making halal institutions, but at the same time, it's not necessarily focusing on riba straight away, because that might be a bigger a jump to make straight away, where we can like start like on the ground kind of fight capitalism as our sort of objective, and through that we can get that sort of I guess paycheck that you're talking about, is we start creating perhaps independent businesses and organizations that try to meet that ethical standards. It's not necessarily like it's only the financial institutions that aren't fulfilling halal guidelines. It's also pretty much any business, you know, be it I was reading before the Nestle, I think they used to exploit the types of, I can't remember, I think it was cocoa powder or something, and there was big campaigns and all that, and it sort of stopped. So things like that, I guess, for example, those aren't on halal principles that we have in the Sharia, but we kind of take it for granted. So wouldn't it be our objective to sort of move away from that? And one way of moving from that is kind of teaching perhaps in the masajid, the kids, the older generation, because we take it for granted, like in the sense of how we go about buy products and use any product that we buy from the supermarket, for example, or even the milk that we drink is not necessarily milk in how it would have been during the time of Rasulullah. And even we know the barakah that comes from those kind of halal foods that are properly done halal in a barakah sense. So all that sort of barakah that you're talking about before, when it comes to, okay, if you follow the foundation of your beliefs, we can also attain that from perhaps doing things more ethically on a business level that can slowly perhaps get that money that we're talking about, the bigger paycheck, and then inshallah, you know, progress, I guess, help assist the Muslim community on a more wider level. Wouldn't you say that's more feasible, and that kind of also falls into the line of how the Sirah and Rasulullah kind of went about things as well, if that makes sense?
Yeah, so
I chucked in a lot there, so
yeah,
my bad,
so
but
that's okay. Let's look at something. When we say capitalism, right? What does the term mean, and what are the main principles of it, and where are the issues? So capitalism is oftentimes put forth as the demon, right? Especially by socialist leaning movements, that it's a demonic thing. And capitalism, if it doesn't matter how we define it, but let's just hypothetically say, take your standard definition of capitalism is that, number one, it's the citizenry, the individuals who engage in the business, right? In other words, the government is not engaging in it in an industry. Okay, the government does not control an industry; the people control the industry. The businessmen control the industry, whatever the industry is, oil, gas, whatever. Okay, that's number one. Number two, there are property rights. Okay, property rights. So we believe that people can own property, right? Mm-hmm. Number three, that people are permitted to engage in trades, right? They can go and make a trade.
And you can't fix the prices as well. That's another aspect of
correct. So that's
what we're just
good. Minimal government interference, and the government
with price,
with prices. Yeah. All right, which that's actually in the hadith. We have a hadith about the Prophet wanted to fix the price.
I was reading that one recently.
And so we basically look at the prices as the government will get involved if there is a harm in the industry. That is a clear-cut harm to the society, then the government can get involved. So that's where some people say there's a mixed socialist element. Okay. Another principle is that the motive of the trade is personal profit growth. Okay, that the person is trying to grow their profit. Now, when I look at this, I don't see anything here. I see a wide open. If those are the terms, of what capitalists define as, I find every person who goes into it is going to come in with their own beliefs.
Yep.
Right. So these ideas are no-brainers in Islam, in the Sharia. You can own private property. You can engage in trade. The hakim, the ruler, cannot stop you from engaging in a trade. The hakim cannot come in and tell you how to fix your prices. And guess what? The hakim cannot touch your money.
Okay? They can't tax your income, no.
They cannot tax your income. They cannot go tax you because you have property. Now, if someone says, oh, well, who's going to pick up the garbage and who's going to dig the sewers? That's a contract between the hakim and the people, right? It's not like a carte blanche tax. I'm just taking it. No, it's a contract. It's a service that I'm doing. So that's another subject. Someone says, all right, how are the poor going to be taken care of? There's a clause. There's possible that the hakim in an emergency setting may borrow from the rich, and in other opinions may take from the rich, and in another saying may take from them but must pay them back down the line. So there's discussion, but in general, your money cannot be touched. Now,
though your assets can be taxed in the form of zakat, of course. In that sense, the hakim, you can seize the zakat of an individual who refuses to pay it, and that precedent is established.
That's correct. Yes, if it's a zakatable category, mainly like the animals, etc. And yes, if there's a way to someone is skipping zakat, then yes, he can forcibly take your zakat, right? So
that's about your assets, not your income. So it is a difference
your savings, and debt is involved in that. So if you're in debt, that's subtracted from your assets, right? And so if you think about it, a 2.5%, could you imagine if you went to people today and said that your tax is 2.5%? I mean, that on income, forget savings, they'll be in heaven. Okay. So now if someone asks the question, well, how are we going to take care of the poor? There's discussion for all that. But the general principles of trading and owning, and then you having the right to your own wealth, this is there in our Sharia. And the Prophet ﷺ, I cannot find hadiths where he's basically attacking the business owners, attacking the rich. I haven't seen that, right? I have seen hadiths talking about sadaqah. I have seen all those goodwill, taqwa, right? So what you're saying is fine. What you're saying is an excellent thing, that we have to take our ethics when we practice, right? But what I'm telling you, for example, you talk about, let's say, a clothing company that is ethical in its nature, right? Any company needs cash. You're going to end up in the world of financing. Financing meaning I need money to do something that I can't afford, right? And therefore, that financing has to be halal too, right?
Yes, that's correct.
You guys have a lot of private coffee shops in Australia. Sydney's very famous for that, right?
Coffee culture, absolutely.
Yeah. So, and you guys, you don't even have chains, right? The chain coffee shops, they don't really exist there, and they're like
no Starbucks. Starbucks is not particularly popular here. Yeah.
Everyone I went to was this little hipster coffee shop. Now, if you look at the finances of a coffee shop, they don't make a lot of money. They're always going out of business. Okay. Coffee shops, these little tiny coffee shops. These guys are not driving home in fancy cars. Okay. So there's a reason behind that. It's because the field it's just not a money-making business, right? Well, where did Starbucks come along? Because Starbucks was not run by a coffee connoisseur who opened a store. It was run by a businessman who fell in love with the brands and then fell in love with coffee. He didn't even fall in love with coffee first. He fell in love with the brand. He saw the logo and the name and fell in love and said, this is a business winner, right? This is a business winner. And that's what I was approached with too, believe it or not, right? I was approached with people who said to me, your image, that little ship with the lines, right? And the colors, it's a winner, right? I said, I know. And they want to take advantage of that. I said, listen, but we have ethics. So in any event, the Starbucks guy, that's what he fell in love with. And he's a New York businessman, so he knows the whole world of how businesses actually run. He went in there and he helped them really develop. He took over marketing and he built it all the way up. And then he said, guys, this is not going to work. This small-time mom and pop operation, you're going to survive, but you're not going to change the world, right?
Mhm.
They said, you know what, you're coming with this New York banker, businessman attitude. We're not interested. Go somewhere else. He said, all right, fine.
Yeah.
I'm going to politely leave. And he opened up his own brand, which the brand was not even nice, right? The brand, the logo he came up with was not, it was horrible from a branding perspective. But he applied his business acumen, and eventually he was bigger and stronger than Starbucks. His brand was called Il Giornale, right? Which, I mean, you can't even say it. Okay. So time passed, and the Starbucks guys, they wanted to merge with who they looked up to, the brand that they looked up to, which is called Peet's. Now, Peet's is a brand that, in terms of branding, it's nothing, right? It's not a nice brand. There's nothing nice about it. The colors are brown and white. What the heck is even a Peet's? It's a name, right? And the logo is just the word Peet's. So to me, it's nothing. And the guy saw that. He saw that these guys are making a huge mistake. So when they bought out Peet's Coffee, who they looked up to when they were coming up, they end up having financial trouble because, again, they're coffee connoisseurs. They're not business people. So what happens is that he swoops in to save them, right? And what does he do? He says, listen, take whatever you want of the shops, whatever. I will pay you a ton of money for this name and this logo because that's the winner, the name and the logo. They said, fine, you're saving us. Take whatever you want. The store, whichever stores, we'll keep them, and you just take the logo and we'll become Peet's. And they became Peet's, he became Starbucks. Now, as coffee, Peet's is good, Starbucks is good, all these little guys are good. But which one has survived? Which one has really changed the landscape? It's the one with business acumen. Okay, and that's where I come upon saying, you want to change the way clothes is made, you're going to need financing. You want to change the way food is treated, you're going to need business acumen. Okay, so the same story with Ray Kroc, right? Ray Kroc, he looked at McDonald's. He said, "This brand, it's so iconic." And I see it before it manifested. He was a veteran businessman. He's not a hamburger guy. He couldn't care less about hamburgers, right? He said, this name, I got to have it. And he maneuvered himself to be the controller to buy them out. And it was, again, it's business acumen. So the point being, my point here is, I don't want to take this on too much of a tangent because I know that a lot of people don't care about business. But if you really want to change the world, a quarter of your time and attention has to be in financial education, in business acumen, right? And Imam al-Haddad, he said an amazing thing, which I was surprised to see. And he said that any community of success has 4 people. In other words, 4 categories of people. He said the first one is the faqih, the scholar, who will teach them their aqeedah and their religion and their law. The second one is the Sufi. In other words, the abid, the one who will remind them of the akhirah, the one who will give them a sense of perspective, the one who will pour some cold water on their heads and in their faces every once in a while to remember, hey, hold on a second, there's something called akhirah here, okay? And don't get so excited about this dunya, it's leaving you. We have to remember that this dunya is leaving us, right? And we're leaving it. And the third person, he said, is the administrator. Okay, that made sense. So you have to have an imam, you have to have an amir, you have to have management, you have to have management of masjid, you have to have a management of everything needs management. Okay, fine. And then he said the last one is the financier. Who's paying for all this, right? Who's paying for all this? So that's where the business. So if you want to look at any one individual, I don't know what kind of jobs you guys hold, but any individual should have a touch upon all these things. We should know our deen. We should know we should have our spiritual development through dhikr, through a remembrance of death and afterlife. We should understand management, and the West has advanced because of management. Okay. And the fourth thing is we should have a sense of how the world financially works. And trust me, I was like you. You talk about finances, I fall asleep. I had no interest. All I cared about was ideals, right? And things like that. Mm-hmm. But as you grow into the field and you want to look at how are we going to make things actually work, you realize that we've neglected this thing, and you can't neglect it. This is so important. It's not just a minor thing. It's a absolutely critical thing. So that's the perspective that you grow into.
Just to sort of add, because I understand you need money to grow businesses, but to give you a quick example, like I listen to a lot of Gary Vee, and he talks about how, and he's kind of big in the States, he talks about how he grew his parents' wine business from like literally like on 100, I don't know, 10,000 or how much money, and even that they had to get that money from hard work and sacrifice and saving that money, and he was able to, and to be fair, he does have that business acumen anyway. He had that natural flair and talent, and what he said that is that he was switched on. He didn't, the thing is, because you're mentioning about more money, which is fine, but I think it's in the context of scaling. So when you scale businesses, yes, you need money quick and fast, but it's about, I guess, if you take a more ethical stance, and I think Gary Vee kind of embodies this, is that he grew his family business, even though it's a wine business, let's just use his business because it's still a business at the end of the day. He grew it from, I think what he said, 10, 15,000 to like almost 15 million or 20 million, something like along those lines. And he said that he did not, and he still does this because he runs VaynerMedia. He said that he hasn't borrowed money, and he hasn't done any of that in his life. And his big principle is patience. So I guess what I'm trying to use that example is that perhaps that you mentioned that you gave the example of change in scaling and needing money and to grow and all that, which I agree, but why can't we say that we can do that through patience and perhaps saving that money? And even though, yes, it's a bit harder to have ethical brands and to, because you gave the example of hipster coffee chains. The thing is though, I agree with you that they may not have that kind of business acumen in that sense, but at the same time, they may not have that sort of...
some of them definitely do, yeah.
Yeah, not saying all of them don't. But another thing, I guess, is if they're actually looking to scale like properly, and when it comes to, I guess, scaling, it happens through having business acumen, like marketing, awareness, all this brand, and a big thing he propagates is brand awareness. So doing the relevant tools you need to improve the brand, because let's be real, like hipster cafe shops, they don't have like a online sort of brand awareness presence. So if we can sort of embody those ideals of patience, growing your brand, and sticking to the principles, which is perhaps, if you have like a coffee chain or you have a coffee shop, you propagate the idea that, this is through ethical ways and et cetera, and it flows on to the fact that we actually talk about in the masajid, because personally, like, and I think you can perhaps agree with this, Dr. Shadee, but we don't actually even talk about any ethical practice in the masajid. Like, I don't think I've really been, maybe there has been, maybe there is, but in terms of ethical practices, we don't even like mention in the masajid.
Ethical practices in this specific, in this very limited sense of within business and within our
I think
consumption.
We just kind of
consumers,
and I think there's a more backstory
because
to that.
Ethics really means just everything that you consider to be good, but in
living,
terms of,
I'm saying like day-to-day living, ethical, consumers. And I'll give you, I think it more stems from the fact that because I'm Bangladeshi by background, our parents didn't have much, so they come here. It's about consumption because they didn't get that from when they were living in Bangladesh, so they're trying to take the most advantage of living here. So I guess there's a backstory to it, but it's about creating that awareness perhaps in the masajid, because it's not being really talked about. And you gave that example in the seerah where Rasul Sallallahu didn't really criticize business owners. I'll agree with that, but how about this in the sense of the context was that it wasn't necessarily happening at that point in time. Well, whereas we can see perhaps, I think with Isa alayhi salam, during his time, he was actually going hard at the business. I think that's more from the Christian text, but I think perhaps it's in the...
Yeah, I think I think I would like not necessarily describe that as an era of what, like when we talk about capitalism now, we talk about capitalism, if you want to even call it capitalism, back in the time of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they were very different things. I mean, the capitalism of today is characterized by limited liability companies and these mega corporations who profit becomes all above all else. That is certainly something that is not only in a kind of fiqh sense, like you can't have a limited liability company in Sharia. It doesn't acknowledge that. you have to have a proper, business owner or someone who's liable for the company, which is something that, contradicts Sharia and is a massive part of modern capitalism. And then, obviously there's no ethical considerations in many of these companies. And if there are ethical considerations, it's literally because they have to have ethical considerations, because then no one will buy their products. Not that the actual drive comes from companies wanting to be ethical. Yeah. So obviously there's a massive difference when we talk about capitalism. We are not speaking about it in the sense that we promote the kind of unbridled capitalism. And like a lot of our brothers and sisters overseas who are literally not slaves, because slaves is something entirely different. People who are told that they're not slaves but are literally being enslaved by systems. That's something else.
One of the things is that there are many ways to skin a cat, like that saying goes. So there are philosophies of saving, don't go into debt, be patient. That's there, right? That's a great way to do things. There's also a way of using debt. Okay, there are ways to use debt in ways that there's not all debt is bad. There's good debt and there's bad debt. So good debt is basically you take a debt, you go into a debt having tried and tested that you can produce a revenue from that debt to pay back the debt and to produce wealth. Mm-hmm. And on top of that, debt has very good reasons. You want to lose your money through taxes, right? So you can go into debt to avoid taxation. So you actually save money. But that discussion aside, I'm sure people like Gary Vee and stuff, they have their own ways of success. There's a million ways to succeed. So there's not just one way to succeed. And the second thing is that you have to remember, after the issue of the elephant in the Sirah, that nobody would touch Quraysh, right? So they were able to basically go up to trade and south to trade without being molested, without having to worry about that. And as a result of that, their wealth just exploded. And so the time of the Prophet ﷺ was not so much of financial corruption as it was of finance corrupting. So it's not like the Prophet ﷺ, there was no like bad form of trading that happens. But if you notice why the Prophet ﷺ was going into the caves around his 40th birthday year is that the people had changed. The difference between rich and poor was so vast now, right? The society had radically changed. The poor were not taken care of. The rich had become so arrogant. So it was not that in the time of Sayyidina Isa, it was the rabbis were using religion to for wealth.
For profit.
In the time of the Prophet ﷺ, it was the wealthy had become cruel. Okay. Yes. So that was the issue at the time of the Prophet ﷺ. So the wealthy had become so cruel and stopped taking care of the poor. So that's why there's so much advocacy for the poor in the Meccan verses. Okay. So there was, in a sense, an issue where the wealth has its problems. The accumulation of wealth has a lot of problems. Spiritual
There's
problems.
That famous hadith about not fearing poverty I do not fear poverty for my ummah, as it's translated into English often.
Well, it's I don't fear shirk, but I fear competition over dunya, right?
Yes.
So Aqidah wars, I shouldn't say that, but not worrying about Muslims losing their belief in Allah was not the Prophet's concern, but he did warn us. So when we're talking about financial stability, I think we should really...
Absolutely.
You cannot go down that road unless you have a very strong spiritual foundation.
I was talking specifically about the hadith of Amr ibn Auf, where he's reported to say that the Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that, translated into English by Allah, it is not poverty I fear for you. Rather, I fear you will be given the wealth of the world just as it was given to those before you. Yes, you will compete for it just as they competed for it, and it will ruin you as it ruined them. And so that ties perfectly into what you were describing about how wealth corrupted the individuals.
Right. And the corruption of the Muslims through wealth is exactly what was happening at the end of the first Islamic century. And this is where Fudayl ibn Iyad and Hassan al-Basri and Rabi al-Adawiyya, all of those who are the so-called proto-Sufis, they came
ascetics,
up. The ascetics, they came up because of this. And we can't just, I personally feel that we have a weakness as a Ummah in America where we have no financial institutions. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean that this venture or this move in that direction doesn't have its pitfalls. It has severe pitfalls. And I have friends who are in the Erdogan's party. I don't even know what the party's called, but
AKP, yeah.
Yeah. So that party, and they remember the 60s, 70s, and 80s, that these were young men, young Muslim men, activists, men, who came up with this idea that we need to control education and we need to control our business. And by controlling business, we can open up schools, we can support each other, and we can eventually maybe make a move in politics. Well, this group of people, this loose organization or movement, became immensely successful. Okay? Immensely successful. And by the way, general practice of Sharia will produce success, right? Because of certain things that are in the Sharia as is. So they became immensely successful. They put the first person into office and they started to control the presidency. And now they've totally have been in the presidency for like over a decade now. But
yeah, and it was wealthy business owners from Anatolia who put him there.
The wealthy business owners who had principles and belief. Money without belief is nothing. Belief is the most important thing. And when I say belief, I'm not talking about dogmas and doctrines. I'm talking about a vision for the world, like a vision that is based upon what would the prophet want. Okay, so that is your driving force, not the money. Money is just a tool for you or against you. Like knowledge. And knowledge is a tool for you or against you. Power is for you or against you. Beauty is for you or against you. It's the most important thing is, what are you intending to bring to the world? So I was shown a picture of a wedding of one of the elites of this group of people who are responsible for so much Islamic work. And he was like, they've reached such a degree of wealth that now they're on the grandkids. The grandkids are just, it's just air is between their ears, right? Obviously, he's generalizing, right? But they have become well known now. They are so rich, so powerful, that they haven't tasted hardship, that there's just air between their ears. All they can think about is looks, is fancy cars, is beauty, and they've lost the vision. They've lost the purpose, okay? And this is something you have to emphasize 1,000,000 times, because if the path to financial independence and growth, right, for the sake of Allah Ta'ala leads you away from Allah Ta'ala, then something was wrong, right? So that's where you're 100% right that you have to think twice. You have to think about what you believe first, and you cannot be so crazy about financial growth. Okay, I just feel that we need to push it because it's a void. It's an area I feel is a void right now. But you have to be very careful the degree to which you push it. You don't want to go off the cliff at the same time.
I wanted to ask as well, just in general, what's your take on the idea of, there is, I think it kind of ties into, I guess, perhaps critiquing the society that we are in, and we've got like activists and scholars and all that. Like, for example, you take Malcolm X, for example, because that Netflix show came out. People use that example that, look, he's Muslim and he was critiquing the society, and look at the change that he made out of that. Would you sort of recommend, I guess, Muslims to go down the route of, being active against oppression that we see in society, and doing sort of campaigns and awareness campaigns and all that to, I guess, change the society in a way where obviously it lines Islamically, and take that route? Or would you be, in the sense, more passive and perhaps not go on the streets and do all that, but at the same time, perhaps go down the line of what what you were suggesting, is to build the institutions and stuff like that, which won't necessarily include doing those like awareness campaigns and all that sort of stuff?
I would do that.
To be a social justice warrior.
Yeah,
essentially, is what you're describing.
I would be very active my philosophy would be very, very active in terms of rights and things like this, but not in the fashion of the social justice warriors. not in their.
So essentially, being a social justice warrior, because that is,
we would have to define that.
I mean,
people will be like confused.
Being a social justice warrior, if you just take those three terms, is a good thing, but with how it generally manifests, can be very problematic for an Orthodox Muslim.
I think the most common one would be like LGBTQ, but even that would need discussion as well, because like the other thing, like to get your points up, but just to add in is because like people will think that, okay, I'm not necessarily promoting the group, but it's about because we live in a non-Muslim land, it's not like LGBTQ
forming a merely political alliance with another group is what you're suggesting.
Not even a political alliance, just be like let them do what they do, but it's not necessarily we should be going out and condemning them, because like what's the value on that in Islam, I guess.
To the Muslim community. Okay.
Well, what I would do in that situation is, you're going to get involved. You got to get involved in your own terms, with your own culture, with your own language, right? And with your own. This is the most important one. With your own priorities. Okay, with your own priorities. So our priorities are not going to be like their priorities. The priorities are going to
essentially
be different. Their priorities are going to be totally different, right? So their priorities is based upon the reality of the existence of this world. Our priority lies on the reality of this world and the next world. Their priority is that who are their thought leaders? I don't know. Who are their thought leaders? Name me a couple of their thought leaders.
Are you talking in terms of left-wing
anyone
left-wing intellectuals?
Yeah, those like them. What is their
like what Bernie Sanders? What do you?
Yeah, I mean, in the political sense, you have like
those even before them, thought leaders from the past.
Like
who did they rely on?
Chomsky's.
Okay, Chomsky. Who else?
I mean, I don't really think he's tied that much to these kind of movements. You had like, if we go right back, I mean, you could probably tie it to second wave feminism and third wave feminism.
How about Derrida and Marx?
Oh, well, are we going all the way back? Okay. That's the last century.
Yeah, the roots. I'm going straight to the roots, right?
Absolutely,
who else?
Oh, are we talking about, if we're going then you have, Weber, Engels,
okay.
The kind of great
so
scholars of that, socialist tradition.
All of that they have their imams, right? We also have our imams. Yeah. Their imams are definitely not our imams, right? I would not want to resemble them, right? I would not want to, and for anyone to imagine that, this is something we're about, right? Or upon. So my point being is that fighting injustice by Muslims, because if we don't resemble the way that so-called social justice warriors are doing it, right? That doesn't mean that we're not doing it, right?
Yeah.
That does not mean at all that we're not doing it. We're totally doing it, but we're not with our own priorities, right?
Yeah.
And with our own agenda, and with our own culture, and with our own language, right? So, and our own style that is rooted in our imams, right? The first one being the Messenger of Allah Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. So, which is why Dawood Walid wrote prophetic. What did he write? What's the name of his book? Prophetic Activism.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah, it was along those lines. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's say
towards sacred activism is the name of the book.
Activism. Yeah. Okay. So if you were to say any industry and a Muslim is in that industry, naturally he's going to look at those people. He's going to see how they do it. You're going to learn from them. I mean, we're not living in a cave here. You're going to learn from them. But at the same time, the first thing you're going to do is to disavow XYZ, ABC, blah, blah, blah. And then the second thing is you're going to bring about the same goal through your own system, or through your own tradition, I should say, that is completely organic, that is completely natural.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
I just want to interrupt you briefly, because I want to latch onto a point you said and kind of question you on it a bit further, because I mean, you brought up Marx and Weber, Engels, and for, obviously those who are into that tradition, as an Italian, we're very proud of Gramsci. My question to you is, you described how we should distance ourselves from these thinkers. And look, I essentially would not want to have the philosophy of Marx. I mean, I don't agree with his philosophy in that I'm a
there's
Muslim.
No doubt this problem.
Yeah, well, I'm Muslim. You know, I was born into a family that you could describe as like a left of center Western family that embodied a lot of the values of you know, the kind of late capitalist, postmodern, and sort of armchair socialist West. Although what I would say is that I don't have an imam in. If I was studying brain surgery, my imam in brain surgery would probably be a kafir.
Correct.
I'm going to say that. I mean, but he might have the most insightful kind of descriptions of how to perform brain surgery, and thus I would want to imitate him in that fashion. Now,
100%.
I suppose my concern is that, and people may disagree with me about Marx or Engels or Weber, Gramsci, etc., Bourdieu as well, in our education system, but they've provided many great insights into as a critique of the modern world and how it manifests today, and
analyzing the modern world,
analyzing the systems of the modern world. And I think that as long as your aqidah is sound and you understand and you're grounded in you know, the kind of basic points of Islamic theology in that, and epistemology as well, in that you understand the book and the sunnah as a source of ultimate knowledge, I see no reason why you can't gain benefit from.
I think that's kind of our point
from
where
Marxist critiques of international relations,
like the
and
Islam
so forth.
tradition, Islamic, like a sheikh like Imam Ghazali was pretty much analyzing our current modernity. Like it can't be said in that.
He has contributions
so
that we can benefit
infusing
from,
both, like getting an idea of, okay, these thinkers of our kind of current climate are making XYZ kind of point and analysis of the current world, and it's about kind of understanding where our aqidah and stuff come from, and then kind of providing ways to have solutions to the modern issues, if that makes sense. Like riba, for example, you know, riba is widespread, etc. But we're using Islamic tradition to bring out ways to kind of get around that. I think is perhaps like one example, I guess. But I guess, yeah, that's what we're coming from our perspective. But
Let
what
me-
do you think?
Let me bring you two things. The first thing is that you have to separate between the tajribi knowledge and moral knowledge, right?
Yes,
Or moral
absolutely.
beliefs. So values. Tajribi knowledge you can take from anyone, right? The only one that you cannot take it from probably is an apostate, because in Sharia you're not allowed to interact with an apostate, right? But you can take it from it doesn't matter. It's physical evidence right in front of your face, so you can take that from anyone, right? So you're taking your surgery from a person. You don't have to ask his religion, right? That doesn't make a difference what his religion is. You can love him, okay, because you're loving him because of a skill that he has and that he's passing on. Now, oppression involves moral matters. Moral matters are not tajribi matters. You cannot prove moral matters. They're beliefs. They're purely beliefs, right? They're subjective matters, and that's where we rely upon a creator and a revelation. So that's the first thing you want to do, is you want to separate between these two things. The second point that I have is that, yeah, you can take a critique, because I'm not taking from Marx how to live, but I'm looking at his criticism of something that is a man-made set of values or beliefs or systems.
Yeah, that's essentially right.
But you have to keep one thing in mind. Every criticism is built on a frame of assumptions. You might not agree with his assumptions. Now, one of the main problems that exists with Marx are a couple of assumptions. Number one, that groups, that you can even discuss groups, like large-scale groups. One of the biggest innovations that he brought into thought is this idea of
Class system.
Class, yes, exactly. That you can actually have a discussion like that and continue talking about that. That is a problem. For us, that's a problem, right? For commonsensically, it's a problem as well. Okay, because classes are much more fluid than there oftentimes are in these discussions. From what I can remember of my taking these classes through from freshman to probably junior year in Rutgers, you're talking about wide spans of groups as if this is even a possible discussion to have. We say it's not even a possible discussion to have, right? We don't talk like this about the rich. Okay, what happens if someone is, let's talk about the rich class. Well, what happens if someone is rich, then he became poor, then he became rich? What happens if someone was poor, then he became rich? What happens if someone's rich, then he became poor? It's fluid. It's far more fluid. Secondly, what happens if someone is rich, but he loves the poor, right? Secondly, what is even the poor, right? So it's far more fluid than he makes it seem, okay? Or than it is in his stuff. Another one is the idea of materialism, the idea that thoughts and ideas emerge out of economic systems. I love the idea of his study of the history of economics. I love that. The history of like how was food brought to the table? How were factories established? How is the money work? I love that idea, and I would probably want to reread some of his studies on the history of economics. But the idea that everything comes out of that, and it's to preserve that system, is another assumption that a reader might not even realize he's assuming, right? And that's an assumption that we reject as well. It's totally not true, right? So these are just two examples of the assumptions that may exist in the language of his critique. Therefore, a person who might not be aware might take on that language. In reality, as soon as he's taken on a language, he's actually taken on a set of beliefs.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I agree with you there. I would actually, and I mean, this would absolutely warrant an enormous tangent, but I would disagree with you with regards to the fluidity of classes. I tend to incline to a sort of view that I've acquired through examination of history that classes are not actually that fluid. Probably in our society, you have some fluidity between the lower middle class up to the upper class, but there was generally, look, I mean, as a European, and in the European tradition, we understand the past of the feudal system. Land ownership has traditionally indicated a kind of status amongst the nobility, and owning land was not necessarily something that changed hands between peasantry and between nobility. Rather, it changed hands between different sets of nobility. So, for example, a nobleman could lose his land to another nobleman, but it wasn't as if a peasant would take his land or acquire his land. And obviously, there were exceptions, but they are nothing more than exceptions. So, I would actually disagree from a historical point of view about the fluidity of classes.
I think you're right until this type of class discussion trickles down into common everyday speech regarding individuals. Like, well, you're 100% right that you can have those types of broad discussions can exist, but they cannot trickle down into statements or judgments or discussions about actual individuals. It's the same way. Same thing with the idea of privilege, right? The idea of privilege is it's a theory that makes sense and it's there, right? However,
I think it's accurate, yes, without a doubt.
Yeah, but
in that it pinpoints something.
Yeah, but privilege, it cannot be applied. You cannot say to somebody, well, you can't apply it. It has almost no application. You can't go into people's minds. You can't go into people's lives and assume that privilege is taking place here. So, for example, if you had someone who is white, but what if he's poor? What if he's mentally unwell? What if he's ugly? What if he's, so white privilege cannot always be applied. Financial privilege cannot always be applied. There are people very rich, but they have other problems, right?
Of course, and so psychological issues transcend all of those classes and spiritual and sort of mental health issues.
So you
in
might
terms of your happiness, it transcends that.
Correct. You might be right in that in a grand discussion and a scheme, you can discuss a generality. But my only point is that it can't trickle down into an individual judgment.
Well, look, I understand that. I do also even would go and say that I don't necessarily agree with you on privilege. I do think that privilege can be assigned. I don't think you can make it a hard and fast rule, absolutely. But I think you can in terms of how societies are structured and how, how if you look at a generality, like for example, I'll just use the example of Australia. It's not that different from America. We can all understand it. Why are could you say that the indigenous people of Australia are the same as the non-indigenous people of Australia? I mean, obviously not. There's no mistake it's no coincidence that their life expectancy is considerably lower than non-indigenous Australians.
Yeah,
I mean,
so I don't know their situation, but I assume it's
probably the same as the indigenous people in America. I mean, they have considerably less wealth amongst them, and a great deal more health issues, and
we know like exploiting the lands when the Europeans colonized.
And that tries
they've always been in that
back,
kind of
yeah.
right.
I mean,
So
that ties back. So
alcoholism is also rampant from those kind of
European Australians are better off than Aboriginal Australians.
Yeah,
by and large,
that's true. But where is it? How is it tying in? The idea
well,
of
in that
privilege?
sense, you could argue that there is a privilege amongst European Australians.
Okay, but how does it make so? That's true. There's definitely an advantage, 110%. Anyone who denies it would be silly, right? But
yes.
My question is, so the point being of privilege is that in that respect, it does transmit a added responsibility in a sense for compassion and almost charitable behavior in a sense. But does that make someone guilty?
I don't think it makes someone guilty. I think it's about recognizing that the privilege exists that may kind of like it kind of plays into the idea of like, you know, why Muslims aren't able to, I don't know, get that same sort of respect as John Smith to get a job. You know, it's like limiting sort of.
Once I recognize it, what do I do now?
Once you recognize what, for example, that you are you're not an indigenous Australian.
No, let's say, just take me for example. I'm telling you from now, I'm like 100% privileged. Okay, in my life.
Okay, so
now, what's next?
Yep. So look, I mean, first of all, I would say that it's we should speak of it as a more relative concept. I totally understand the rejection of the language that's used by certain proponents of these ideas and how it can be kind of irritating and seem really like shoved down your throat, aggressive and over the top. I understand that in certain spheres, although the way I would explain it in terms of what you should do if you were 100% privileged, you'd have to define what 100% privilege even means. Like, it's all kind of relative in the sense that as a European Australian, I have an advantage from that fact over Indigenous Australians. That trickles into all aspects of society. Now, I am almost entirely certain that people speak to me like, look, even my boss wears a hijab. One of my bosses at work wears a hijab. People speak to her very differently to the way they speak to me. We might say exactly the same thing.
Yeah, that's
and in terms of our social mobility as well, that extends to that, because employers would perceive us to be different.
Yeah,
and would prefer. Yeah, sorry.
So that's also just to add in, like, for example, we talk about Aborigines. Like, here, what they've started to do is that get into medical spots, as a medical student, they give sort of a certain fraction of it has to be Aboriginal people, because
like a quota
they're
system.
being disadvantaged. So it's about giving them the opportunity. So it kind of flows onto that. So when you realize, I guess, your privilege, when you're in a position of, I guess, leadership, you're able to realize that, yes, you should be perhaps giving more of a lending hand to more people that aren't in the same position as you, that may have come from, they may need a scholarship because, you know, I don't know, they've been living on the streets the whole life and they just happen to have an opportunity, are intellectual. So it's about giving them the opportunity to sort of flourish, rather than just say, oh, they haven't been working hard, or
and also, like I said, it's relative as well. So, for example, I'll use the best example. I'm born in Australia. My predominant ancestry is like Southern Italian. If I go to America, people just be like, "You're a white guy."
Yeah.
But in Australia, I try to tell people, "Hey, I'm a white guy," and a lot of Australians will go, "Nah, they use the derogatory term wog." But they'll say, "Oh, nah, you're a dirty wog. You're a dirty Mediterranean person." You know. So it's relative in that sense. Yeah.
All of this, I actually have no problem with anything you're saying. I mean, with the issue of the requirement, really, of the so-called privileged person, right, to recognize the view of the world, or the experience, the view of life, or the experience of someone who doesn't possess what you have, right? And that's something that I think that if a person lacks that type of awareness, and I think we do have our own Quranic view of these things, right, and language for these things too. But the idea in itself, not only is it acceptable, it's an excellent idea, right? It's a beautiful idea to me. The idea that you have to recognize what is the world like from people who don't possess the thing that you have and have had so long that you don't even realize that you have it. sometimes.
Well,
right?
it's shukr, isn't it? In a tasawwuf point, it's you could describe it as a displaying of shukr for what you possess and the advantages you have.
Yeah, it's total shukr, and it's also that you have to look at those who don't have. The Prophet always said, look at them. One of the reasons he said look at them is because when you look at the poor or those who have less than you, you're going to actually see your own blessings that you have, that you might have taken for granted the whole time. So now here's why I would hesitate, and I think that it's a type of ghulu or extremism, is that as soon as someone possesses a privilege, those who love justice or claim to love justice oftentimes immediately look at that person with some degree of suspicion, right? Or some degree of that they should be feeling guilty, that they should be tiptoeing around the world, right? That they should be, nervous about their language, right? I mean, that to me is a ghulu. I have no, tolerance for that type of thing. I don't see any justification for it, right? That, okay, so you're a white guy. All right, I don't know how you look, but if you're like tall and handsome and rich and all that stuff, and you have knowledge and you're educated and you're not in debt, and then there's certain class of people will look at you as if you're evil, right? You're going to be looked at in such a way that like you're as if you're evil, right? As if you owe us the world, right? Whereas I would say you owe me nothing. It would be nice if you're considerate to those who don't have what you have, right? And that's it.
Yes.
That's the maximum. And if you do, good for you. And if you don't understand how I live, right? And if you're mean to me because of that, if you're mean to me as a result of that, then Allah is going to take care of you. But the idea that you're somehow should be nervous, should be guilty, should be whatever, to me that's I just totally reject that. I have no tolerance or patience.
Yeah, by and large, I have no issue with that conclusion, and I would just caveat that I wouldn't say that it's a reason to throw the baby out with the bathwater, but you should warn against. Yeah, you should warn against that kind of. And as Muslims, it's unacceptable.
Yeah,
I mean, you can't have that kind of even though there is like inter-ethnic and probably in America it's a serious thing with the large African American Muslim community. I think that they make up one of the largest Muslim communities in America.
Yeah.
So I'm sure that there are issues and like difficulties there, but by and large, even Malcolm X, he spoke his rhetoric about the white people, and then when he went to Mecca. And he said, he described that famous line where he said, people whose eyes were the bluest of blue and skin was the whitest of white, brothers with...
it's about achieving that essentially.
And as Muslims, we... and he said, he literally described how they were the whites in America, when he was describing how the whites had treated the blacks in America, and many of the whites had. He said that Islam had removed that attitude from them.
Yeah.
So that even though they were white, that white attitude that he'd experienced and been victim from, and been a victim of, had been removed from them by the
exactly. Like even Malcolm X makes that point in his autobiography that I think there was a white man that was in charge of the black institution. I think that was helping black people, and he wouldn't show up to any of the actual on the ground helping when they needed assistance and a lot of help. He wasn't there, but he would only show up when there was like cameras and media around. So he was trying to highlight the point that at that time the white people that he experienced weren't actually exhibiting the sort of help or assistance or really understanding the situation. I guess that's what it kind of feeds into the dialogue of privilege, and it's about eradicating that.
Do you guys notice that there's this almost there's some people who give themselves permission to do a psychoanalysis of those who are so-called privileged, right? And almost going into their hearts and their intentions and their minds and play psychic, right? And play, and psychoanalyze them. And that there's almost this type of social acceptability of this. That you can, that a white person or a rich person or in Islam, an Arab person or whatever can be looked at and be psychoanalyzed to dig deep at how this word actually indicates privilege, right? I mean, this type of culture is, firstly, it has no basis, right? And it's happened to me several times, which I have no apology for it, right? I'm not apologized for any of these things. I'm totally not even guilty of any of these things. but in the sense of having wronged someone, having intentionally wronged someone, and accepting that some absolute stranger is doing a psychoanalysis of me on an app, right? I mean, this is ridiculous. So that's an element of element of the culture that has to go.
I agree with you, and I think that this specific culture is actually far more widespread in the States than it is in.
I don't think it's
in Australia.
Totally.
In Australia, it's kind of very limited to certain circles. I've been in those circles. I've actually experienced what you've described, not as a victim necessarily, but just from the way that they treat.
So many of these things, you just it just happens that you make a comment on something. All of a sudden you're being psychoanalyzed. What? Who are you? Right? And and my thing is, I might not want to have a fitna, but I never apologize to these things, right? Because your intent better than anyone else, right?
Absolutely.
So I might not want to have a fitna, so I might not answer back, and I might pull out of the discussion, but I'm not apologizing and feeding this, because if you apologize to one of these types of people, you're going to be apologizing for the rest of your life.
I'll put it some people might be confused by this. I'll give an example that I noticed of this and that I actually experienced with someone who I know of well. During the Sudan political turmoil, there was a campaign around social media about raising awareness about Sudan. And one notable post described how the reason that the Muslim community didn't talk about what had occurred in Sudan was because of racism against Africans. And they called out shuyukh in the community for not mentioning it, specific shuyukh for not mentioning the Sudan issue and labeling it as an issue of racism. Now, all the while, these people did not share a single thing, and I can even bring it up. I'm pretty sure it's on the history of what they shared. They didn't share anything about sort of the concurrent political crises and like massacres happening in South Asia. And in obviously in China as well, and less known kind of oppressions. So the thing is, it's like you have this selective rage, and you're talking, these kinds of anything you really can up to some kind of hidden agenda of individuals against a specific group of people in whatever context it be.
It's totally.
And you're right.
It's completely negative. Now, there's always in these types of things a kernel of truth, right? Or an element of
comes
truth,
from,
right? So let's say I hypothetically did totally not give any concern to Kashmir, let's say hypothetically. Now, when we talk about Muslims being activists, we're active or caring for oppression, okay? Because I like to use my own language. Then what about the method of how we talk to people? Right? How is accusing the guy of being a racist? Is that exactly going to? Firstly, it's not an objective thing. It's not something. It's just a claim, right? It's an accusation. Is that going to change his heart? Is that going to change his mind?
No.
Right? Is that going to help?
No.
What's the goal? To tear someone down, or to? Because if your goal,
it's not nasiha, is it?
It's not nasiha.
It's not advice.
And if you tear someone down, do you think the next time around he's going to do something with ikhlas? Or he's going to do it just because he doesn't want to be torn down, right? So it's almost like if I go and attack my kid, you didn't pray, you're a fasiq, right? You must be a fasiq. Okay, so the next time he comes for salah, do you think he's going to pray with ikhlas? So this movement is just it's going to push hypocrisy. It's going to peddle hypocrisy amongst the people. And there are I've heard people say, listen, I might care about an issue, but there are certain issues I'm not even going to support it, because if I say I support it, the response will be, "Oh, you're trying to win points. You're just, being patronizing. We don't need your help, right? You're just trying to, be not labeled as this, that, or the other." So when you have, let's think of what caused the people to go that route. It caused you to go that route because you're in a lose-lose, right? You've been put into this lose-lose situation. So we have to think very critically when we go down the route of we want to do things for justice, but
absolutely
these people are actually peddling an injustice because they're actually.
And it must be done with adab as well, with akhlaq and manners and
it's got to be done with a total with the principles of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And we can clearly understand, if I went around and saying, oh, you don't wear hijab, you must be a fasiq woman, right? You must be what kind of reaction would I get? Okay. What kind of reaction would I get? Oh, how dare you judge her, right? Okay, then why is it any different when you call someone a racist? How is that different? Who are you to judge me, first of all? And secondly, you think that's going to win me over? Now, if you went to a masjid, okay, and you went to this masjid and you went around talking to people like this and talking to the youth. Hey, you youth, you're just on your cell phones. You're probably watching something haram, blah, 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 blah. You guys are fasiqs, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Now, the mom, right? The mom and the people are going to say, oh my gosh, I go there. I had such a bad experience. Nothing touches my heart, right? Right? Nothing touches my heart. That's fair, right? So
That's true.
It's the same thing if you're trying to raise awareness to someone's privilege. Is going to being a Wahhabi about it is not going to get your point across. You're just going to make people hate you more. And if they do something, it's out of hypocrisy. You're very rarely going to get someone to be mature enough to say, let me separate this monster, this warrior, from the point that they're trying to make, which actually I am wrong about this point, right? I am wrong about this point, and I'll fix it irrespective of this monster. Very few people can do this, right? And so that's where I sort of, part ways, I guess you could say. Not part ways. This is my main issue with the culture of the people who are trying to do something good. I don't have a problem with they're trying to do something good. Like the kids who go around beating up other people. You're a fasiq, you're this, that, and the other. You're on bid'ah, blah, blah, blah. I believe that truly in his heart, he's trying to do something good. But his way of doing it is so ignorant, right? And it may turn him into a worse person. And it's going to turn the people around him into worse people. So, that's just, my 2 cents on the subject matter.
No. Wouldn't you say that it's exacerbated, on Twitter, and you may get it as a lot. I don't know, maybe you've been called it as well, a racist. But obviously, there seems to be sort of lines drawn up where, there's this traditionalist camp and there's a SWJ camp. Yeah, and in general, it's like there's no sort of kind of dialogue. It kind of gets lost in sense of we've just kind of defined our own groups. Like this guy obviously may, for example, gets painted as SJW because he may not have the Islamic knowledge to your degree, but at the same time he is on firm principles of the Sharia. He tries to follow it to the best of his ability, and he has knowledge about in academia and etc. And he may talk about these issues like racism, race, class, whatever, and we may define him as SJW.
We might takfir him, essentially.
Not takfir him,
no, but like we might call him a fasiq.
But wouldn't that? Wouldn't you say that happens quite a lot?
Funny.
And the conversation kind of gets maybe diluted as well in the process.
It's funny because we're the Ash'ira, so we call someone a fasiq, we don't go straight to kafir. If this was a different podcast with different individuals, we'd be just takfiring.
Yeah, I think that we should just move away from the generalizing people and putting them in a box and just talk about this one idea. I mean, I have friends who are they swing back and forth. They're in our circles of friends, and they sit with us, they study with us, they do everything with us, but they have their own other thing going on too, which maybe slightly accidentally contradicts it, right? So there is fluidity in the subject matter, right? There's fluidity. I have a friend of mine. He's a rapper. He makes music videos. He's crazy, right? I mean, that's what he spends his Saturdays doing. He's my friend. I love him, right? But there's a fluidity to things, right? Someone say, "Oh my gosh, how could you think your friends saying rappers are crazy?" Yeah, when you're born in a Pakistani family and you become a rapper and you're talking like this and you're putting camera angles in your face and you're doing all these things, and this is not you. This is not you, right? This is not where you're coming from. So to me, it's crazy. And you're a student of knowledge and you come to the masajid. But khalas, people are mixed bags. You're not going to go and trying to get everyone to be exactly the way you want them to be. And who cares? Let people be what they want to be, as long as they're not coming after me. So we have to have this degree, like you said, this element of fluidity, this element of some gentleness with other Muslims. And young Muslim may be into something right now, it's just like a fashionable. It's like a fad, right? It's just, or a phase, you could say. He's into that as long as he's not making a big contradiction or being a jerk. That's all I care about, right? Hamza Reza, he's into all this stuff. He was on the podcast the other day. He's a friend of mine, right? He's into this stuff. I know that he's well versed in these scenes. I have friends who are into politics, right? Khalas, as long as you're not coming after me, right? And you're not coming after the deen and changing it, let people be as they are. So my point being,
there needs to be husn dhan always.
What's that?
There needs to be husn dhan. Like
exactly,
you need to have that.
Exactly my point. Exactly my point. I only have a problem with someone who comes after people with an attack, right? Or with something like an accusation. Okay, an accusation, and I hold those things to be like destructive, and especially if you can't really prove it. It's not a provable thing. That's my problem with it, right? It's a subjective term that is about someone's heart. If I say someone is a thief, well, if in the court of law he was proven to be a thief, then he's a thief, right? But I can't prove someone's intention. That's my problem. I hate someone going into someone's intention and saying, you're this, and it's a term that, can't really ever be escaped. And I think to call someone a racist is one of the biggest things that it's so easy to do right now. And it's just, what is there a book that I can see that, what is it makes someone a racist? What, it's just so shifting all the time. And
but wouldn't you say like someone calling what about the term Islamophobe getting thrown around?
Also, I want to just,
don't we make that I suggestion as well?
Quickly just agree with Dr. Shadee, but also just mention a specific point, like Sheikh Hamza Yusuf is someone who pretty much single-handedly has kept me on track, and I've never met the guy, but mashallah, like
from the distance,
he's inspired me. Like before I was Muslim, I used to watch his video, and that was he was one of the individuals who really just, like, I was in a trance whenever I watched everything of his. SubhanAllah, his contribution to my life has been immense. Probably he's probably the individual who's most influenced my life. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the hidayah that I alhamdulillah received at that time in my life came through Hamza Yusuf.
Yeah, I could say
much of it came through him. Yeah. But I disagree with some of the things that he says, but I would never say, Hamza Yusuf, I don't listen to him because he's a racist. Hamza Yusuf, I don't listen to him because he said this about Black Lives Matter, or he said this about the government. Like, there is so much benefit to be had from an individual, and you may disagree with one of their points or one of their perspectives, and also you may not necessarily be able to sit down and speak to them and flesh out what they actually believe. You just label them something, and then you never listen to them again. You abuse anyone who tries to like even mention them in your circle.
I totally agree. This is just insane. It's total khawarij, right? And yes, he has something that I don't like. He has something that I like, right? But to label the essence of the person with a label that you created, to me, is a big problem. It doesn't make no sense. It just doesn't even make sense, right? Because even when we say the word fasiq, we mean a public sinner, someone not ashamed to sin in front of the people. When we say fasiq, we mean someone who deviated in his belief from what's clearly stated in Quran and Hadith. So there's an objective meaning there, right? So is someone who uses certain language to hurt people, how do you know that it wasn't a slip-up? How do you know that it wasn't out of ignorance? How do you know that it wasn't something that, just a one-time mistake? If he persists upon a set of beliefs that show a superiority of one group over another, okay, then call him a racist every single day. I have no problem with that because he persists upon it. But if he had a slip-up here, even if he had 10 slip-ups and he recognized every single time, this was a slip-up, I made a mistake, right? Okay, I'm so privileged, I don't even realize that I'm offending you all, right? But it's a mistake. He's admitting it's a mistake. Khalas, right? So that's my point, is where, like you said, to put an essential judgment on a person and cancel him out completely because of a slip-up that the person recognizes his slip-up on the Syrian revolution or the Syrian rebels or the whatever it was with the in the Canadian, what was that, reviving RIS, that was the other one, right, or whatever. Okay, and you don't think that we've seen this? You don't think that he's made these comments about Arabs a long time ago and we just tolerated it? We know that he's so whatever, he's so in his he doesn't recognize sometimes what he's saying that could be offensive to Arabs. Okay, khalas, that's something that is there, but it's not a doctrine that he's holding on purpose. That's the difference. Okay, and I can't go into his heart and say what he believes on purpose. I have a big problem with those types of things.
Dr. Shad, do you feel that sometimes there's this whole kind of divide happening where there are people who've studied within academia and have learned philosophies of this time, essentially, that I guess other non-Muslims have a grasp on, and give their sort of insights on how to navigate issues pertaining to Islam in this day and age. And they kind of use the whole idea that they're analyzing society and they're trying to help the deen in that manner. These guys aren't necessarily like fully learned to the degree that perhaps yourself and others are, but they have a solid kind of grounding in theology. They know the aqidah. They're not some random deviants going around, but like they're definitely part of Ahl Sunnah. They're trying to help the society, this and that, and they're probably on Twitter as well, and they're airing their views and this and that. Don't you feel that there's a divide between, I guess, the scholars that maybe like you might put yourself in that camp, and then versus you're kind of having to fight them? And at the same time, wouldn't you say that some shuyukh kind of talk about those sort of topics, like politics and all that, when it's not even in the field, and they're giving kind of rulings or blanket sort of opinions when it may not be applicable within this day and age? So what's your kind of thoughts on that?
Well, what you're saying is I only have an issue with one thing, which is the snootiness and the derisive, dismissive attitude that tends to, take hold of some people inside of academics or when they get into it. And it's a learned habit. And I've seen people learn it, and I've seen people, I've seen people fall into this type of thing and become, arrogant, really is the word. And it just gets compounded when they hang out with one another. And by the way, anytime that you talk in a generalization, you make a generalization, you're gonna make a mistake, because someone's gonna be outside of that generalization. So let me not say they, right? Because everyone's gonna have a different view of what they means. Okay, so I'm not gonna talk about they as in academics. I'm just gonna say in general. Okay, in general, the attitude, the arrogance is a quality that comes with people when they study a lot, especially when they're analyzing and deconstructing constantly and almost becoming psychic shrinks, basically, like they sort of do psychoanalysis of people. And adab is not something that's taught in the humanities. So you go study some liberal arts topic, no one's going to teach you the adab of how to handle knowledge and how to monitor yourself and your own attitude. Whether people realize it or not, this derisive and obnoxious attitude sometimes creeps in, right? And hey, people make mistakes. Sometimes, other attitudes creep into other, professions. So everyone makes mistakes, and I'm open to that. But that's the main thing. When I see that, I just don't engage at all. I don't want to engage with them. I don't want to have anything to do with them. Okay.
I think that's interesting. You mentioned that your main qualm is with the behavior and the kind of approach that they have to the discussion. So I guess you would suggest, the obvious conclusion is that you would suggest that if an individual who did come with respect and like wanted to dialogue, first of all, a respect for the deen, but also for with respect for you as a brother and obviously just as a human being, if that sort of comes with the discussion, then it would be something completely different. Although when someone comes with kind of vitriol and an agenda of kind of anger and hatred, that would irritate and pretty much.
Well, sometimes you simply see outrightly that the people, they're not concerned with the actual deen. They're concerned with Islam as an identity, Muslim as a race, right? Or as an identity. And when you pull them out of that, or anything that pulls them out of that world, sometimes you see them like they're like rejecting it, and they've taken on a completely, maybe you could call it a critical race theory framework, and that's how they view the world. Or they've more innocently, I could say, involvement in a discipline so heavily could cause a person to basically lose adab. And this could happen to anyone. Could happen to anyone who gets carried away. And who gets carried away more than young people? And I would consider myself still, in the middle there. Maybe I'm not young, maybe I'm not old, but I would say that it's easy to get carried away. That's how simple it is to say it, And people get carried away.
To give a quick, because you brought up critical race, like locally here, many people know like Yasser Morsi. Like for us locally, he's kind of on the ground, so we can I guess relate to him better, as opposed to perhaps figures that may be in America that are propagating critical race theory. So like someone like him, he has his book Radical Skin, Moderate Masks, and he kind of goes into sort of the political situation for Muslims and how I guess. Perhaps Hamza Yusuf's approached his politics compared to Walid Ali, who's a famous Channel 10 presenter, versus
he's basically
others.
like a
Majid Nawaz, etc.
How would I describe it? I mean, he's American, so like Walid Ali is almost like a CNN host in sorts, but a Muslim, like a sort of not like Fareed Zakaria, but sort of in that same mold, in that he has his like own kind of news show and that he's like the anchor of it. But go on, Tanzim. I just want to explain for Americans.
He's like people, and we did an episode with him and Mort from Mamluk, so people can check that out. And you can kind of tell like he's coming from an angle of kind of helping Islam, but he's sort of using tools that I guess he's learned, and that kind of falls. And one of them is sort of critical race theory. So wouldn't it be sort of problematic to say that we may be generalizing too much? Because you can make the case that someone like him is actually looking to actually
his
intention, to be honest on Twitter he goes a bit crazy.
He does go hard,
but regardless of that,
which is literally what Dr. Shadee was talking about. He's like just the lack of respect.
But I'm saying like there should be like a healthy discussion.
At least his intention is to help the ummah. Like his whole in his mind, he's trying to help the situation of Muslims, and the reason he goes hard is because he thinks that his opponents are actually
I think what his perspective is that the opponents that are kind of trying to dismiss him on the basis of he's coming from a sort of non-Muslim framework, and you've got to be grounded in the tradition. I think to some degree he is, but in the sense of how to the scholarship of Islam and all that, so there might be a bit more dismissive. You get what I mean? So I'm just using him as a case study. So like, what are your thoughts, like Dr. Shadee, of like someone like that? Wouldn't it be fruitful to have like a discussion? And then when he talks about race and racism, that's something perhaps that we can kind of benefit from as well, I guess.
Listen, I had a discussion with him one time late at night. I'm sitting there on my couch, and it was years ago, right? Before his book came out. And I'm sitting there, it's like 10 o'clock. I'm about to go upstairs, and all of a sudden I get this barrage. I try to have a discussion. Hey, listen, people have bad days, right? It's nothing wrong that I have a bad day, right? Everyone's got bad days, and everyone's got things that they regret, which I'm sure, I do, so I'm sure he does too. But I honestly try to talk, because anyone who, I actually always try to learn more from people than what I give. So, the experience was just like, it was so condescending. And like I said, people could have a bad day. That's not a problem. It was so almost vicious, right? And I felt like, you know what? I don't need to be talked down to. I don't need anyone giving me some kind of a lecture, insulting me. So after that, I actually just kept moving, and I never really got involved. And I don't know this individual's, I don't know him. And I just had that one or two experiences where I apparently I got on his radar, and he was for a while like obsessed with tearing me apart. But anyway, people have their bad days. People have their bad years. People have their bad phases. So I'm not going to hold it against him. But my perspective is that I'm not going to deal with someone who's coming from an insulting, aggressive perspective, right? If that's your situation, then I personally believe anyone who comes at someone like that, and I'm not talking about him, I'm saying in general, who comes at someone in that fashion, whether it's through critical race theory, whether it's through, whatever else that they're into, Wahhabism and their bid'ah, right? And back in the day. I know they've died out and they've taken a beating over the years. Whatever
not in fashion
comes
anymore.
From that perspective, I actually consider that something is not right emotionally with the person. I'm not saying it's him, but that's how I view it. And I say, listen, when that person gets their life in order and figures out how to talk to people, then I'll pick up a discussion. I have no problem having a discussion with anyone. The moment you start insulting me, I'm off, right? I'm done. I have no need for it at all. You're not paying me. You're not my boss. You're not my mom and dad that I have to deal with you. So it's that simple with me. I'm very quick with the hook as soon as someone comes with an attitude. If someone comes with a disagreement, and I've had people on my page who have come with disagreements on everything. If I sneeze, they'll tell me I sneezed wrong. But they've always been respectful. Right? They've always been respectful. The moment I see that a person is hurling insults, I realize, it's not about me. It's something maybe emotional. Maybe they have other issues in their life, and they actually probably need dua more than a discussion, to be honest, right? So I just let it go, and I move my own way. That's my take.
I guess I guess you just had bad experiences, Sheikh. Like this, I guess that's like the takeaway point. And I guess it's about having.
No one's gonna bother me. It's not like a bad experience. Like I'm victimized or upset. No one bothers me. None of this bothers me. But it was to the point that, listen, I'm sitting here. If I'm not going to be respected, adios, goodbye, ma salama, right? Put it in any other language. How do you say it in Urdu, in Bengali, right? That's how simple it is in social media. I'm that quick with the leash, and I don't take it against them personally. They might be having an issue. They might be having a phase in their life. And secondly, I don't care what it is, right? My social media experience, my experience in life in general, is that I'm on a point where I only literally have to tolerate a handful of people on the earth. I have to have sabr with a handful of people on the earth. That's it. And as for anyone else who's going to, be annoying, I'm not obligated and under any circumstance to deal with it. So that's my take on it.
I guess we'll probably touch on more about the ideas rather than the person. But I guess let's just say someone comes to you with maybe critical race theory or any kind of philosophy.
Even like Islamophobia. Do you think that the genuine kind of academic drive amongst Muslims to combat Islamophobia in that sphere is fruitful or not in general?
Well,
because
if it's framed in the fashion of Islam being a race or Islam being a merely an identity, it's actually a problem.
Well, the thing is, I understand that, but the idea is that we live in a society that positions us as a race as opposed to us considering ourselves to be a race. Does it make sense?
Yeah,
in the sense that as a Muslim,
But I don't negotiate, and I don't budge on. You have to be in control of things, right? If society pins you as a race, right? This isn't a form where it's like 5 choices and I'm stuck to pick one or else I can't continue the form, right? We have to actually insist otherwise. And you have to put people into the framework that you believe in. You're not obligated to just accept someone's framing of something,
Well, what sort of because people would see it as, it's more about safety and it's about protecting ourselves from that. I guess Islamophobia is like a there's a lot of baggage to it. I guess people will interpret it differently.
There's
as
like
well.
ordinary day-to-day Islamophobia, but then there's like government level Islamophobia, which also
ties into CVE sort
policies
of stuff,
and where they're like trying to change
tanks.
the deen, and where they're not letting us build our mosques. The approval gets blocked at last minute because the government gets lobbied. Those sorts of things.
I know a lot of people use the phrase Islamophobia, in a loose way and not in a critical way, which is fine. All that stuff, you have to fight those fights. I mean, what are you going to do? Let yourself be pushed around? And at the same time, you got to realize that, there is an element of it that you should not expect everyone to, love Islam. Quran is telling us they're going to fight you, right? Doesn't mean you just give up on it, but this expectation that we can just live harmoniously and with everyone else, that's on our part, fine. But we should expect from the Quranic narrative and a Quranic perspective that there's going to be pushback, because there is something called Iblis, and Iblis will constantly foment trouble. Okay? And that's the framework. And I'm telling you, there are some people. Now tell me this. When I said the word Iblis in this discussion, how did you guys immediately feel? I would venture to say that if there are activists, right, out there, and we're discussing this stuff, and you mentioned something like Iblis or something of the ghaib, immediately there was like a reaction of like, oh my gosh, where is this discussion going? What is this, right? Do you agree?
I think with some, they're like completely immersed in the political.
Okay, so that's what I'm talking about. That's merely a symptom, right, of where the mention of the ghaib, the mention of anything pietistic or Quranic, right, it elicits a reaction, okay? And it's as if the immersion in cause and effect has caused a divorce between us and the ghaib. This is a problem, right? If we don't realize that is a problem. Anytime that you feel divorced from mention of Quranic understanding of things, mention of the ghaibiyat, then we do have an issue.
I think though, so just to add in, like, I don't know if people have a sort of a reaction, but I can understand that they may not kind of explicitly speak on those terms. But in general, it's not like a Muslim in the political sphere or any Muslim that's kind of embodying Islam. Like even for example, Omar Suleiman isn't gonna, when he's like kind of representing the Muslim community, he's not gonna start talking about Iblis and unseen and stuff. You know what I mean? So I think the political situation, like I think that's what they're trying to. You know what I mean?
Discussion within the Muslims, amongst the Muslims. Right, amongst Muslims only.
Yep.
Right. This subject, when you talk to some people who are immersed in cause and effect, like I said, as a general thing, whether it's in science or otherwise, right? And like I said, this is an issue of getting carried away. That's all it is. It's not that big of a deal, right? It's just an issue of getting carried away and losing perspective. And political analysis is no different than someone getting into any field and getting immersed in cause and effect to the point that the mention of ghaibiyat becomes a foreign thing to him, that he can't, it's like, I don't want to hear this. This is not what I'm here to talk about or whatever. That's merely a sign and a symptom that we got carried away with the ghaibiyat. I mean, with cause and effect, and analysis of our political situation or social situation that is divorced from being rooted in the Quran, that's not going to work, right? It's just inconsistencies will continue to rise up.
It's certainly not a necessary divorce in the sense that they're both not mutually exclusive, but your concern is more of the trends within certain groups and movements within society and how certain trends tend to lead to certain paths. But I think obviously you're not trying to suggest that it's a causation so much as it is a correlation with these attitudes, correct?
It's just a correlation. There's no way to say that, it's a causation. It's a correlation. I mean, I could go into all the people in New York who are into finance, and they have big issues with the very simple definition of riba. Okay, you tell them riba is that which, a loan that begets a benefit. With anything that's deemed either a currency or a stock, the stock custom stuff of a people, they're going to have a reaction to that discussion. They're going to have a reaction to the idea. Why? Because they're immersed in that field. Likewise, likewise is the case with people in the field of whatever you want to call it, politics,
science as well,
liberal
science,
arts,
I'm sure,
sciences,
as well.
Whatever.
The natural sciences.
Yeah, natural sciences. They're going to take issue with certain things
That's a
related
big
to
one.
evolution. It's predictable, right? I can predict that they're going to take issue with discussion about the creation of Adam, alayhi salam. They're going to take issue. I guarantee you that I can predict it. Likewise, I can predict certain, people taking issue with other elements of Islamic law, of our usul, of how we handle who we consider to be an enemy and who we consider to be an ally, etc. So
that's actually a good point about the ally and enemy. Like, to give an example, I guess these kind of a case study of a Muslim, practicing Muslim, that's kind of using political science or whatever to analyze society and kind of assist Islam. This is a common sort of theme, is that they will say, for example, Sheikh Hamza Yusuf's approach to, Black Lives Matter and all that, like his political decisions and how he said that, black on black violence. When he talks about that specifically, people kind of say that he's taking the approach of more of the right, kind of like a...
so you're saying that he's taking the approach of the enemies of Islam?
That's their critique, yeah.
Right.
So they'll be like, look, that's not the way that we should kind of help the deen. And then we're not obviously going to the extreme of going around and parading with, gay parades and all that. But what they'll also say, though, however, is that why are we fixating ourselves so much on homosexuality in society and everything, right? Like,
they'd say that they're not the real enemies of Islam. The real enemies of Islam are, the people, the big powers who keep us...
The more right-wing...
The white supremacists,
because they tend to be more white supremacists, and they look down on Islam and subjugate Muslims, essentially, and do bans to travel bans.
And their argument is that Hamza Yusuf is kind of complicit in some of those attitudes, correct?
Well, it sounds to me... go ahead, you finish and I'll...
No, I've finished. Did Rafael finish?
Yeah, I was just asking you to clarify that. So the suggestion from an individual who is immersed in these ideas is that Hamza Yusuf is, an accomplice to some of the ideas.
But I find that a loaded term. It depends, like, if there's an academic term for it that I'm not aware of. But I think I don't know. I can't... Like, they find his stances problematic, so they're trying to forge their own sort of path when it comes to approaching these political decisions. Yeah. So wouldn't you say it's sort of a correct, perhaps, analysis that can be within the confines of within Islam, or it is an Islamic approach, I guess?
Well, when we talk about analysis of things and borrowing from others, deconstructionist types of thoughts, one of the issues is priorities. Right. We oftentimes when we're learning what you accurately described as descriptive matters versus prescriptive matters, is are we absorbing their priorities? Okay, so are we absorbing the idea that maybe racism and white supremacy is greater than an issue of homosexuality, and that the homosexuals aren't really our issue, right? They're actually our allies, and the greatest threat to the existence of the universe is white supremacy. Okay, where are we getting our priorities? That's the question. And here you have, I've seen this many times. Imams, people, not imams, anyone who studied the deen, have a different set of priorities than oftentimes those who are involved in political science, right? Or those who are involved in critical race theory or whatever. So, priorities is a matter of oftentimes revelation, right? It's in other words, in the sense that that's a matter of knowledge that we have to study. It's a whole chapter of knowledge called the fiqh of priorities, right? So it's something that's important for us to understand what's worse than what. It's also something important to understand when we actually completely toss somebody out, which we call in Sharia al-bara. There's al-wala and there's al-bara, right? Wala is who we're loyal to, in the sense that who will always be our brother and who will always have our support, even if as an individual, even if on a certain point we won't support them. we have fiqh on that. And if we haven't covered that already, it's very simple. If someone does not possess a heretical view and is not unabashedly sinning against God in public without any shame, then they're going to be our brothers in Islam. Okay, we might disagree with something, we might really hate something, we might disavow an action or a word, but they're going to be our brother. We're not going to. So the opposite of that is called tabdi' and takfir. You're a person, and you're a person of bid'ah, you're a fasiq, you're a kafir. Okay, so having a wrong or misguided, we can even say misguided, political position that does not touch upon any serious doctrine of faith, it might be totally offensive to me. It might be, I believe it's going to lead to harm. We don't cut that person out of the picture. Okay. Now, what some people like Dawood Walid called, or others have called, political takfirism, is the takfir done by activists, certain activists, right? And I hate generalizing because someone's going to fall outside the generalization, is that you basically, if you fall out of line with the progressive agenda of the left, you're going to be takfired. So Hamza Yusuf is out. He's canceled. They don't use the word takfir. They use the word, like, maybe at the popular level, canceled. Okay. Or toxic.
Canceled. Yeah.
Okay? If you've expressed,
I actually mentioned that to Tanzim before.
Canceled on Twitter. Yeah. Toxic in terms of marketing and conferences and stuff like that. Untouchable. Someone who you can't come near him. Why? Because that person has expressed something that's against the progressive agenda. All right. Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, Hamza Yusuf, maybe at some point Zaid Shakir, when he talked about not to be so quick to blame those who are accused. Remember that Me Too video, or the Me Too era, that he gave that khutbah right when that Me Too movement had started. And he gave an Islamic approach, and he said, hold on a second, whatever happened to innocent until proven guilty? Okay. So he was basically out because of that and other reasons. Okay. I guess,
like,
Ismail
with that
Royer,
example, sorry, just to add quickly, like, just that specific example, I think it's not necessarily the fact that they're using Islamic principles. I think that it looks like they're trying to take an objective stance, but people make a case that they may be, like, Black Lives Matter, for example, like, they're kind of siding with perhaps the oppressors. Like, they're not kind of, you get what I mean?
They have 1,000% right to say that and to analyze it, right? But to what degree is this matter going to be elevated? So in the government, in airports and military, when certain thing happens, you have to channel the degree, right? So if I find a little black piece of luggage, is that code red and shut down the airport? Right? No. If there's a guy waving a gun, okay, that's very different. If there's a guy shouting bomb, 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 that's another level. So there are different levels, okay, of a threat or a problem. Okay, there is triaging of problems and there's levels of issues. Okay, political issues, as bad as it gets, as if it's political, I might not talk to the person. I might not want to talk to the person. I might not want to. I may be disgusted by them. All that's fine. At the same time, he's going to still be my brother in Islam, right? So, for example, one of the points, I've always had issues with Hamza Yusuf's politics, and his siding, number one, basically, he's the one who opened the door to the perennialists, to the Sunni community, right? To put it frankly. Number two, he also was.
Sorry, could you elaborate on that slightly before we go on?
The perennialists are a group of academics.
No. Yeah. Yes.
Who have a very ornate, flowery philosophy. The summary of which is that all revelation, the three revelations, are basically true in themselves. Okay, but there is an overarching spirituality, and that you don't necessarily have to believe in the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam in order to be saved. This is their actual belief, right? They have a lot of good things about them. They're all very nice, nicely put rich people. And they put, that's what they are, mostly Caucasian. Okay, and they have wonderful books, and they have very prominent positions in university, mainly because Sayyid Hussein Nash pushed them all through, to be honest, and he trained them all, and he got them all through his influence, and he's very influential in the government, so he's a big shot. Okay, now the perennialists were out doing their thing, no problem. We'll read their books on the environment, read their books on maybe Sufi biographies, right? Until they talk their nonsense, and we just edit that out. But never did a Sunni imam bring them into the community to preach their thing until Sheikh Hamza Yusuf came. And that's one of my public criticisms. He did it publicly, and I criticize it publicly. I think he's totally wrong about it. Of course, he's going to have his own opinion and say that he trusts that the Muslims aren't going to fall into this belief. But he never, until I spoke out and made a big fuss about it, he was never putting a disclaimer. Okay, there's one time that he put a disclaimer, which is way back in the day in the Sirah of the Prophet, peace be upon him, on a line from Martin Lings, which said that these two rivers flow together, blah, 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 Islam and Christianity. And yeah, he did put a disclaimer there. But afterwards, in the recent years, when he was sort of promoting them and putting them in, there was no disclaimer. And that was my only problem. If he had just said, listen, I'm working with these perennialists, this is my judgment call, and we're not perennialists, and perennialism is actually kufr, right? If you believe that, and that's how you die.
I guess like you just have problems with how I guess Sheikh Hamza Yusuf approached it. What was the other point? Sorry, I feel like we're going way off topic.
The disclaimer. So that's what perennialism is. All it was needed was a disclaimer. When it didn't come, and then people who flipped out, because I was sort of, if we use the word triggered by it, because I know these people, I went to school with them. They're very sneaky people. They've always wanted to be inside the Sunnis and get acceptance. Really what they want is customers, to be honest with you, right? They want all the Muslims to buy their book because we're the people who are going to buy. The actual perennialists are like 15 people. So they wanted us to buy their book. They wanted a wide audience. They wanted to be accepted. Fine. Everyone wants to be accepted, right? No one wants to feel like they're a sect. But Sheikh Hamza, all he needed to do is put a disclaimer out. Be open and honest. Don't try to not hurt their feelings and say it is kufr billah. It's kufr, period. If you go and believe that, you don't have to believe in the Prophet to be saved, like they do when they have their Thomas Merton and their whole bunch of Hindus and some certain monks and all that stuff that they promote. Anyway, point being, I've had my issues with Sheikh Hamza on that and on his very warm and cozy relationship in the Middle East, and tend to always, side with those rich. Now, guess what? These are judgment calls. At the same time, I think that those are just wrong positions. I have a big problem if we're going to now treat him like someone who's, a pariah that's completely doesn't even deserve our respect, blah, blah, blah. I could be so angry with something, but when I saw some of the activists go off on him on his Syria comments, which was very bad, right? Okay, it's horrible. I would think the perennialist thing is worse, but it was bad. It was a bad look and a bad comment. He shouldn't have said it. He should have laughed in that arrogant way, which if someone says, listen, man, only these elite white people laugh in this smug way, I can't blame him, right? However, I stopped there. I would never think to insult him. I would never think to dismiss all the benefit that he's gave to the ummah. So that's the balance.
Yeah, I agree. But everyone was saying, people.
I'm not going to politically takfir him. For example, what they've done is politically takfir. So you're just absolutely thrown out the window because you didn't fall into something. And someone like Ismail Royer, right, when he basically made a joke about people eating bats and mice, right? I mean, I didn't find that that's something. I didn't even see how that was racist, because he was basically saying, okay, some people, I mean, that's how people eat. He said Chinese, right? Or China. Yeah, but you think he's stupid? You think he doesn't know that not all Chinese people do this? I mean, some of these people are so smug in themselves, and the judgment that's passed over people, they need to look in the mirror and realize you are the most judgmental people, right? That you don't think that someone like Ismail Royer is sophisticated enough. It doesn't have a brain to not realize that not all Chinese people do this, and people all across the world eat disgusting stuff, including white people who eat like pig's blood, whatever they call it, black pudding, right? And Arabs may eat disgusting stuff, and Africans may eat disgusting stuff. I mean, it's just such a silly way to go about. You're canceled. This person's canceled. This person's a racist. From what? Right.
So I actually had, I think our public disagreement is, I had a tweet, I had a back and forth with you, Dr. Shadee, about this, remember?
Yeah.
My kind of approach was, I won't get too much into, like, people can check it on Twitter, but like, my perspective is like, I understand, like, yeah, I agree with you in sentiment, but if people are watching that, that's not like what they think. Like, they don't read a disclaimer. They just like see whatever. Like, the statement was, from memory, was like, you know, eat crap or something.
He said, "Hey China, eat filth, get sick."
Yeah. So that doesn't really have a disclaimer to me. So that's why I disagreed with that, and I used the example of that's what white nationalists or kind of Islamophobes do to Muslims, and that's how they post. So that's why I said we shouldn't mirror the sort of behavior of what gets done to us. So that was my approach. But anyways, I don't want to go into that's a side issue.
That's a side. But you know what my point is too? My point is, if I see a regular white guy, right, and this white guy makes a generalization, these Muslims are going to bomb something, right? I have a brain. I'm not stupid, and I don't think he's stupid. And it's an expression that is general, that is intending specific people, right? So I actually don't take offense of those generalized comments, right? I just personally don't. Maybe it's something the way I grew up, right?
But people say that like that kind of sentiment kind of leads up to what, I don't know, Trump does, and then what happened with Christchurch and all that. So that's why we should kind of try to steer away from those sort of sentiments. You get what I mean? So
yeah, we have to, I guess, now be so super sensitive because of the amount of insane people out there. I guess that's where we're going in the world, right? And we have to just be so super sensitive. But I'm just telling you, the way I grew up was I spent years in school. Every day was an insult contest. I had a great time, right? Maybe you can call me weird, right? But that's the way we grew up in New Jersey, right? You grow up, there was listen, you know what? If I said 1% of the stuff that we used to say back and forth in the public school, me and kids and the kids that were in my class in 7th and 8th grade, if I said 1% of that stuff, people would say, "Oh my gosh, this is the most racist thing in the world." That's just how I grew up. I tend to think, and I try to have a husn al-dhan with people, that one incident is not a reflection of character or even beliefs. That's why I told you, when you brought up Yasser Morsi, like is a person that I'm not going to look at or I'm not going to talk to. But listen, I'm not going to judge it either. So I'm not dealing with him, but I'm not judging him either. He may have had a bad day. He may have had a bad year, right? How do I know? Maybe he was getting divorced. Maybe his wife wasn't respecting him. I don't know. Maybe so he's taken out on people on the internet. Maybe his sheikh treated him badly, so he's taken out on anyone who talks about Allah and His Messenger. And maybe none of that's true. And maybe he really isn't.
I don't think.
Right? Maybe
I don't think.
Yeah, maybe
you're going to do anything to improve this relationship that between you and Yasser Morsi with those comments. He's going to come for you.
Listen, many of these people, to be honest with you, they get obsessions, and it's worrisome, honestly. And I challenged one guy, and he couldn't keep it up. I said, "Listen, you're obsessed. You're obsessed with me. You're obsessed with Ismail Royer. You're obsessed with some other third, Abdullah bin Hamid Ali, and it becomes an unhealthy obsession to attack and show that this person is so bad." And listen, Yasser Morsi may be bringing a lot of good. Very good for him. That's wonderful. And I hope he improves and gets better at what he's doing, right? And gets rewarded for it. And anything that is, a little bit not 100%, may Allah make it 110% for him. I have nothing personal against the guy or anyone for that matter. But I did have an issue with the extremes, calling Hamza Yusuf like a filthy whatever, this, that, or another. And it's almost like, yeah, you guys are smart, but you actually don't know Islam, because it's not how we talk. It's not how we treat people, right? And it's, what it almost is, there's license on certain people to go after them in a insane way. Remember we spoke. I don't know if we brought this up at this episode or not, but you can call anyone today a racist. Okay. Now imagine if me, let's say someone who's trying to promote Islam and Sharia, imagine if I went around calling people at any sign of a sin in their Twitter profile, you sinning fasiq. How would I be received by the online world? Right? People are going to say.
But I guess that's because you have that sort of role in the community, so obviously they're not gonna.
Well, listen. Immediately, people are going to say, "Who are you to judge them?" And is this a manner to talk? You're just pushing people away from your cause. So next time, someone throws out a word like you're a racist, okay? Well, why don't you look in the mirror? Are you now? Who sent you as anyone's judge? If a imam would come and say, "You bunch of fasiqs, all right? You bunch of sinners and usa and fujjar, okay, and kuffar and mubtadi'ah," and you would get so
sounds like the Salafi mosque, doesn't it? I said it sounds like the Salafi mosque, actually.
Yeah, and you would get so offended by that. But the leftist activists also go around with their own terminology, being Wahhabis. Basically, they're like SWJ Wahhabis, or whatever they call them, SJW Wahhabis. So they're going around.
What would you define as racism, though, Rafael? Like, what would you think of racism?
What would I define as?
Would you see it as the same term as a fasiq? Like,
yeah. Look, I think that what Dr. Shadee is talking about is the modern kind of political reality, and when you do brand someone a racist in 2020, it is part of exactly what we were talking about before in terms of cancel culture. Like, it's like, how you have a major sin, and that if you commit a major sin, that leads you to be branded a fasiq, right? Mm-hmm. Racism is now a major sin. So if you're accusing someone of racism in the in the current environment, then yeah, you're accusing them of committing a major sin in public. That's it. So in that sense, yes. Although obviously there's different understandings of racism. Like, we all know that there's an academic discussion about what racism is, which includes, kind of political forces and systems. And when they're broken down, I don't know of anyone in the Islamic world who would kind of say, yeah, no, that doesn't exist. I mean, we know perfectly well, like, what happened to most Muslim countries, how European countries came, so forth, and how we're living in the West, and it's a Western society that says it's open and equal, but it's not really open and equal, because I could not be president or prime minister of my own country that I was born in because I'm a Muslim, even though it claims to be a secular country that's free for all. So there's that idea of racism, and then there's the idea of racism where you have stereotypes and generalized layman's racism. And so, yeah, I mean, we're talking about different things here, and in essence, I there's nothing problematic in particular about what Dr. Shadee is describing about individuals who are cancelled out, like Sheikh Hamza. I was really upset over that. Like, I was genuinely distressed because Sheikh Hamza is someone who's had a massive impact on me, and even throughout
me as well. Yeah,
I think all of us, man. Like, and so when people are calling him just some white guy. Like, he, how can he be just some white guy? The reason I'm in this conversation, like, say a Muslim brother calls Hamza Yusuf just some white guy. The reason I'm in the conversation is because the hidayah came to me through Hamza Yusuf. Part of that, yeah, like, just unequivocally. So the reason I'm sitting at that table speaking to that guy about Hamza Yusuf being a white guy is because of Hamza Yusuf and his impacts on me, and in the way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose him to guide me to the deen. So how can I sit there and say, oh yeah, I agree with you, that's all he is? Obviously not. And yeah, like, you might have, these are not issues that are, unequivocal in the Quran and the Sunnah.
To give, I guess,
so you look,
I tend to, like, understand through, like, activists, I guess, on the ground. I feel that if we give them a bit, if we go back at history a bit more, like, I felt that those people were always against the whole, how the whole media kind of propped up, the good Muslim and bad Muslim, and just be the good Muslim. And they were actually on the ground going against that notion, and they're very critical, right? And they felt that the whole community was actually, just be a good Muslim, be practicing, and that's it.
You're talking about government, like Western governments, spending money telling us not to question the situations, yeah? question the political situation and don't rock the boat and just
that. So they were out there saying,
trying to basically feed us secularism and just make us say, oh, your religion has no place in the public sphere.
The activists were going against that, and then there's the CVE, and then they find, like, they've studied it, and
whilst they bomb our countries, so forth.
So they found that problematic. So I feel that, me personally, like watching them, I felt that they were the most vocal and the most active, and they just seemed to be in the media presence or do what they needed to do in order to get that message across. So I come from a kind of different perspective of the sort of stuff they've done. And then Dr. Shadee, like a lot earlier before, you mentioned are they kind of embodying, I guess, the principal foundations of Islam in the root. But isn't that sort of terminology problematic in the sense that we would only deem X to be Islamic knowledge, and if you have, I don't know, Y, which is kind of not the Islamic knowledge, that means that that's un-Islamic. But rather, like, we can say all knowledge is from Allah. We can kind of, people give examples of, logic, how it wasn't necessarily, Islamic per se when it started out. But even with, like, we had a guest with I know Safina Society in an episode with the 4 temperaments. That's totally not like from the tradition. That was just incorporated into how we sort of view things. It was from the Greeks. So all these things, if you actually take it into account, we can't just be like, okay, this is Islam, that's un-Islam. We should always stick to
there's
you get what I mean?
There's a difference between physical things like medicine and moral things.
But even with like naturalism, people, like, the underpinnings of that is problematic on Islamic Aqidah sense. So like, you'd have to be wary about those sort of notions as well.
Even in observable science, the conclusions they reach, you're going to have to analyze them and put another filter. We have another filter through that, right? So naturalism is, it's the analysis. That's not even observation. It's the conclusion as a result of an observation, right? Of how and why things happen, but it's beyond the observation. So likewise, on moral matters, it's even more sensitive.
That's fair enough. I mean,
it's even more sensitive, and you're going to end up, if you can put it through, the best way I look at it is that if you're going to put it through the sieve of the Quran and the Sunnah and fiqh and all that, then why don't you just call it Islam then, right? If you're going to say, all I'm going to take is whatever works in this phase. So what's the result? The result is that secular moral idea, it triggered for me to look into what our deen says about this subject, right? Like oftentimes my view is that feminism triggered for Muslims to think about what is the right treatment of women, right? And are women getting their rights? So yes, a secular idea or group can trigger us and make us think about something we weren't thinking about. I have no problem with that. But after that, I really don't, if it's a moral matter, I don't really need to go any further. I could read an analysis, like you mentioned. Can we read like a Marxist analysis and take from that? That's going to be fine. I mean, unless if you have to actually be knowledgeable as well to know what assumptions you may accidentally be assuming, right? So you avoid those assumptions. And we have the Mu'tazila failed to do this. The Mu'tazila were excellent Islamic thinkers that were defenders of Islam against the Khawarij. Okay, what ended up happening is that they took on, like, maybe without knowing, or maybe knowingly or not, doesn't make a difference to us. They took on some of the assumptions of the Greeks. Okay, and therefore Mu'tazili Aqidah ended up clashing with certain Sahih hadiths that all the Muslims accept and verses of Quran, and so they just threw them out. Okay, so that's
just
where,
to add, even with however, wouldn't you say our fiqh tradition has been sort of maybe argued a reaction to the times that
our
it was
fiqh tradition? Sorry, what?
Like in terms of I think I think Jonathan Brown makes a case that the rulings for slavery, for example, was shaped by, I guess, the Romans tradition, for example. So a lot of the sort of things that we have rulings for may be kind of perhaps be analyzed as a reaction to the time and place. What would you?
What
And
do you
now that
mean
we're in a different time and
slavery
place.
rulings were a reaction?
I don't know specifically. I'm just trying to come up with the example. But
Are you talking about the society itself bringing about certain rulings, and now that
yeah,
the
okay,
society,
I
so
know
it's like kind
a
of
specific one, like a
it's kind of an
they'll
usuli
say-
point.
Yeah, I think like Hanafis would tend to be a bit more sort of Deobandis would tend to be a bit more strict during its time and era, simply because with the colonialization and the British coming in, they were very strict on like how Muslims kind
They
of
were
wore,
they
like,
are strict.
yeah. And people will say that was like, analyzed to be a reaction to its time. So to say like this is pristine sort of, Islam that we're embodying, and we just look back at the texts to sort of take on board from Islam and kind of present it. In this day and age may be sort of problematic, because if you actually even even with the Mu'tazila example, we know that they were immense with many things in the sciences of Islam, and they were like because I'm doing Yasir Qadhi's advanced theology course, like they were on the ball way before like us traditional Sunnis were sort of in the frame when it comes to all these sciences. So you could argue that fact that it's not because it seems like there's this kind of pristine Islam that's sort of been propagated throughout time, and it's about us just researching the books and applying it now. But you could analyze that in the history, it wasn't necessarily like that either, if that makes sense.
I actually read, by the way, just a funny point, I have it now. There's actually a Deobandi fatwa against having fun. It says, not valuing time and wasting it in frivolities and useless activities is not keeping with the nobility of a Muslim. And Allah Ta'ala knows
that's like
best.
one example, right? I don't know how serious that is. I don't know if you went to a random web.
from the Deobandi website.
Well, the thing is
Banned
that,
fun.
every reaction, there is an element of truth to that every people are going to react, and they're going to couch the reaction what they feel is the right thing to do, and they're going to find the evidences they need for that, and that's all fine and good, but it just won't be absolute. So that fatwa people's fatwa on different subjects might relate to only a specific time period, right? But it still be rooted in evidence, but the motive behind it may be contextual, if that's what you're saying. The motive behind it and what's intended behind it may be completely contextual, and so it might not apply in another time period, even if it's rooted in evidence.
It's a whole debate about Ibn Taymiyyah. Isn't it, about whether, because you have some of the like takfiri Salafis who are militant, claiming that what Ibn Taymiyyah was teaching about removing like governments and about Muslims who were superficially Muslim and fighting them as well because they're kuffar, whether that's only bound to the time of the Mongol invasion.
Yeah.
And then you have the madakhil, like the madkhalis and stuff, who are literally talking about that only being bound to that time. And then you have the militant Salafis talking about how, no, that actually extends perpetually. When Ibn Taymiyyah was talking about these taking action against these false Muslim governments or superficially Islamic governments that don't rule by the Sharia, he actually meant it perpetually. So that's interesting you mentioned that, because that's a very, very poignant case study of whether certain rulings and certain trends are merely reactionary or whether they're actually meant to be perpetual.
Yeah, which is why it's very important to understand the concept of the mashhur opinions, because mashhur opinions are those that times change and the fuqaha in those schools may differ. They may not see that the evidence that, and I'm talking about mujtahids within the school, not just any person. So that's why we have to look at what are the dominant opinions in schools, because those dominant opinions where you have such a massive swath that come from different geographic locations, centuries, political situations, and cultural situations, and still came up with that conclusion, then you can pretty much say that's absolute, that's textual, right? That's not influenced by a context. Right.
This is go on. Sorry, no, go on. Please.
So whereas an opinion of one person is still vulnerable to biases, it's vulnerable to limitations. So
yeah, absolutely. I think it's really interesting case study again of this idea of you mentioned the mashhur of the madhab being something that we generally stick to and that doesn't really change.
Yeah.
But we were talking a little bit about I was talking to Tanzim about Sadl in the Maliki madhab, and it's really interesting how
Dr. Shadee emailed.
Yeah, he emailed. I was really grateful for that, by the way.
Yeah.
I've been looking for something as succinct as that.
Yeah.
But we were talking about it, and what I know, like, if you look through the text, like, Sadl is the mashhur of the madhab.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone can really debate that. Although there are people now, because of funding from, especially like Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, there's a lot of money being poured into institutions that are supposedly teaching Maliki fiqh, but with the kind of Salafi inclination, and they're literally changing the reality of the mashhur being the Sadl being the mashhur of the madhab. So even that can be like vulnerable to.
Yeah, I think.
And even just to add quickly, sorry, even with the Shafi opinion that to make purchases you have to see it in person, and that's actually like that means that you can't buy anything from the internet.
Is that the mashhur opinion?
I'm pretty sure. Yeah. Like I'm
talking about like the prayer that we genuinely believe.
But I'm adding to that as well. So it's like these things are like. Now, no one's going to follow that. You can't buy any internet. You can't buy anything through the internet, essentially. So, you know what I mean? Like, that means that Islam, like, that's what I view, like, Islam as being more dynamic. But yeah, go on, sorry, Sheh.
Yeah, and what you said that basically that about the issue of the Sadl, it's taken on a symbolic element. So it's taken on a element that you're basically almost, I don't want to say rebelling, but you're sort of basically trying to undermine the entire methodology of the madhab, and that's where, in the Maliki school, the issue of Sadl becomes such an important issue because it symbolizes the methodology. It's the most visible reality of the method of Malik himself, which put the amal of Madina over any ahad hadith or otherwise. So that the amal is treated as a mutawatir hadith. So you're right about that. That you might think, well, is it really a big deal? And the other scholars are correct. There is an other opinion, but in places like Morocco, it is taken. It's taken as a bigger issue than it is, right? So you are right about that, and so those are the contextual issues that might take on a far greater reality than they are in theory. So, for example, today we have sensitivities. You can't doubt that there are sensitivities today that weren't sensitivities in the past. And speaking about someone's race today is far more sensitive in the past than it is today. I mean, today than it is in the past. So you might find someone like Ibn Khaldun making such a clearly statement. You made it today, you'd be finished, right? And yet people tolerated it for a long time. Whereas
Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani refers to the land of the blacks. Yeah. He's like, you can't do certain things in the land of the blacks. Just like literally that's the language.
Well, Ibn Khaldun, he says outrightly, you find these people, they are prone to levity and dancing, right? And he says that. Can you say that today? You'd be skewered, right? If the thought crosses your mind, you'd be skewered before you even said it. So, and that's not wrongly. I'm not saying that's a bad thing.
It's bad, yeah. But it wasn't a big deal because then you had great ulama from West Africa like Usman Dan Fodio, Uthman Dan Fodio, who's like, according to some, he's actually the mujaddid of that century, the great Maliki scholar who founded the caliphate. Yeah, he founded a khilafah. Like, he didn't read Ibn Abi Zayd's book and throw it away against the wall because it was racist and it had kind of sort of negative undertones about Sudan, like, because that whole area of sub-Saharan Africa was called Sudan, which literally means like the
place of black.
The place of black. Bilad Sudan is like the land of the blacks. Yeah. So you had he didn't throw it against the wall.
And
it didn't offend him.
That within an understanding of Islam, there are priorities. There are certain things that you would throw the book against the wall and throw it in the garbage, right? From one statement, right? One statement could cause you to throw an entire work out the garbage, right? Out the window. But clearly, I'm sure he didn't like the statement, right? Some of the statements. He totally didn't agree with it. But we had a place for that matter. Whereas, I mean, today, if you have a Shi'i sentiment, that's enough of a reason in all four schools of thought to completely dismiss an author and anything he has to say after that, right? And when he's been thoroughly dismissed and nobody will be tempted to listen to him or misunderstand someone citing him, then you can go back and cite him in a non-religious discipline. The same way that Zamakhshari, we cite him for language. He's excellent in the Arabic language. He was a Mu'tazilite, right? But the scholars said it is only because it's so well known that he's a Mu'tazilite and that we don't take from it. And the fitna of the Mu'tazilites is basically dead. Okay, so we do have points where we would throw the book out completely. Now, people aren't going to like this, but the reality is that making a comment about race is not one of the issues that you would completely end all ties. However, today, if you insist upon that today, you're going to hurt a lot of people. So it's more of a matter of the obligation of a Muslim not hurting people. If a bad thing has become elevated to the point that it is such a sensitive matter, then at that point you must respect all of what your Muslim brothers feel, right? Even if it's really not a big deal. Like, for example, I was in Umrah and had a great experience with a guy. I put a picture of him up because I'm not used to seeing people with like cornrows working in Masjid al-Nabawi, right? And I don't think anyone is, right? And speaking perfect English. I didn't expect this, right? All of a sudden, a sister took offense to that. Okay, it's racist because I don't know why. It's racist because you assume whatever. All right. To me, I felt her comment was, I didn't agree with any of it at all, to be honest with you, any of it. And also people, they told me about, the person have extremes in the past, like not saying salam to non-black Muslims for some reason. I don't know what her point was. Maybe she was trying to show them what it feels like. But she was a chaplain. I didn't agree with it. But at the same time, she's still a Muslim. And she's still somebody that I'm not interested in hurting a Muslim, especially when I'm doing Umrah, right? I don't want to hurt a Muslim. If they're upset by it, fine. It's not something that I stand for. It's just a off-the-cuff post. So
it's about not airing to either extremes, I guess, but it's about having that. It's
not a hill worth to die on, right? So I couldn't care less. You take you think I need likes? I have plenty of likes. I don't care if 500 people like it. I could care less about that. So if it's going to be a Muslim is going to be upset by it, even though in Sharia there's absolutely nothing wrong with it, right? Nothing wrong with anything that I said. But if it's going to be hurtful to her, fine. It's important not to offend people, even if you disagree with them.
I think we probably have to wrap up. I know you have to head off, but I think a bit over time. Apologies about that, Sheikh. But one final quick question, though, because it seems like you, Doctor. No, we've asked him in the last episode. No, this is because you brought up Yasser Morsi. It was like some beef going on. Would you be open to doing a kind of on a round table?
I want to do it
round table on.
I want to do it because some people, and I'm not saying this is him, but some people, they're very sharp, right, behind the screen. Right. And it might actually affect them, because they don't see the person in front of them. And it's very much easier to relate to people when you're seeing person to person. So if he wants to do that, fine. Wait, what would the topic be? We have nothing overlaps between us.
We don't worry, we have plenty to cover. So
because if it's going to be about critical race theory, I mean, that, honestly, it's to a degree, it puts me to sleep, to be honest with you. Right. Because it's just not something that I'm into. It seems like that's his main thing, but I'll talk to anybody.
So inshallah, if I don't know, LMA can fly you out here, and then we'll fly out Yasser Morsi, and inshallah we'll have like a round table. So you heard it here first, inshallah.
To be honest, be good. A lot of the academic mumbo jumbo puts me to sleep. I'm totally not interested in it. I would say honestly, I really like the blue collar types a lot more.
I actually think I recommend checking out our episode with Mort. That kind of did really well because it was very it wasn't like it was CRT, but it wasn't like it was very relatable politically speaking. But like I would love to have a discussion, but we probably will let you go now. Jazakallah khair, Dr. Shadee. We covered a lot of various topics, so inshallah it's of benefit, and we'd love to have you on. And one small request: can you follow me back on Twitter? You haven't followed me back yet. So
he's been waiting to.
What do you mean? I didn't follow you on Twitter. What's your name on Twitter?
No, like you followed Boys in the Cave.
Ignorance. He's gonna be like, you didn't.
What? I didn't know.
You followed our Boys in the Cave, but my personal one, Tanzimi. So TANZIMMY on Twitter. Yeah, you can just follow me, inshallah, and okay. I can tell my mom about it. She'll be pretty happy.
I didn't realize I didn't follow you. Hey, what happened?
So good.
What happened to your fancy picture that you were getting an award? You changed your little picture there.
No, I didn't change it. It's still there.
Changed it?
No, I didn't.
Maybe he's looking at the wrong guy.
Oh,
I think it's a different guy.
Wait, it was you, and you had a picture of receiving an award in front of a yellow backdrop. Am I wrong?
Oh, right. I think that was like me and Josh took a picture. Yeah, I think I changed are you talking about the cover photo?
Yeah, like your
face. My cover photos now it's just Boys in the Cave.
No, your face.
No, my face it's like a white background now. It's just my face. Yeah.
Yeah, it used to be your picture getting some fancy award, which congratulations.
There you go.
Yeah. So.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question for you, by the way, Sheikh. Whilst I have you, I'll be very brief. Yeah. So I was reading a book from the Madina Way English Library on the internet, and it had like a series of fatwa in it. And one of the fatwa was someone who refuses to pray. If someone has not apostatized but affirmed the prayer and yet says, "I will not pray," he is given a respite until the time of the next prayer. If he does not pray, he is killed.
Okay. Yeah.
Is that a fact point within our madhab? Like you have to execute someone who doesn't join the prayer? Like I didn't know about that.
I think that is it one prayer? It said one prayer. That's what it said.
It says, and then it says the commentary is, if he says I will not pray now, I will not pray at all. He is still in the daruri time in which he can pray one rak'ah without considering being at rest or balance or recitation of the Fatiha. This is to protect blood as much as possible. If he rises to pray, there is no problem. Otherwise, he is killed with the sword immediately.
Okay. I mean, I have that covered in the fiqh book, but I don't remember seeing it to be that to have a time limit like that.
Actually, this is Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani. This is an English translation of Ar-Risala.
Yeah. So, that necessarily means it's the mashhur.
No, mostly it is. One of my teachers said that most of them are, but sometimes.
So what I need to do is go to the Hadd's crimes chapter. That's in the Hadd crimes, right? So I would just have to look at that and see specifically what
the Hadd is for someone. Because actually, I was reading in another part that in some cases they'll even accept the testimony of someone who neglects salah. So I'm like, that's random. There's an opinion that you can take the testimony of a prayer neglector.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So I have to figure that out and look at it. You know, have the ummah would be.
So he can come to court, but otherwise we have to kill him.
Yeah, I mean that's the thing. We'd have basically 250 million Muslims left if we did that.
That's it. If we did that all the time, I think it's something that's probably been put behind us.
Probably have to let.
Yeah, but we'll let you go.
But
thanks,
he's followed me back. I've just checked. MashaAllah, kept to his word. But all right, we'll wrap it up there, inshallah. So for our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any questions or queries, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com or find us on Facebook and follow our journey through Instagram. Check us out on Patreon. $5 Patreon. You can go on our WhatsApp chat and have a discussion with us, inshallah. So for our special guests, Dr. Shadee Elmasry, Rafael, and myself, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.
I actually thought that wasn't on the episode when I asked about the killing people don't do salah. Some poor person is going to come up to us now and they're going to lose their deen because I talked about killing someone who doesn't pray.
Yeah, I believe that. All right, guys.
Thanks. We're going to talk about racism.